You're able, and we'll sing "O Canada." O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north, strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. I'd like to have a motion to approve our agenda with the following changes. We'd like to move up items 11.3, 11.4, and 11.5. We'll move them up to the beginning of our staff reports. Actually, why don't we move them right up ahead of presentations, petitions, and delegations, as our treasurer is going to be giving us a recap of the budget, and then we'll roll right into budget at that point. Was that Councillor Andrews' motion, seconded by Councillor Peters? Thank you. All in favor? All right, before we move along, I'd like to do our land acknowledgement. We'd like to acknowledge the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people, including the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Odawa of the Three Fires Confederacy. We had a closed session earlier tonight, and out of that, we're going to rise and report on the following: that Council hereby authorizes staff to advise the County of Dufferin that the town is willing to lease 65 McCarthy Street, currently known as the Jean Hamlin Daycare, to a licensed daycare operator for a period of up to 5 years, should the county decide to proceed with the ending of direct delivery of child care services at 65 McCarthy Street, and that staff proceed with the issuing of an RFX as required. Moved by Councillor Post, seconded by Deputy Mayor McIntosh. All in favor? Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Adoption of minutes of previous council meeting. Recommendation that the minutes of regular meetings of council held on November 26, 2019, and the closed meeting of council held on December 2nd, 2019, be approved. May I have a motion? Councillor Peters, seconded by Councillor Taylor. All in favor? Thank you. All right, so let's go to, per our amended agenda, let's go to 11.3. And this is regarding interim borrowing of the town. A recommendation that report CPSTF 2019-29, a 2020 interim borrowing dated December 2nd, 2019 be received, and that council pass a bylaw to authorize external temporary borrowing in 2020. May I have a motion? Deputy Mayor McIntosh, seconded by Councillor Andrews. Any further discussion? All in favor? Thank you. 11.4, this is regarding police building upgrade strategy. Recommendation that report CMS FP 2019 titled Police Building Upgrade Strategy be received, and the council approve the required upgrades to the police building as per the OPP requirements, and the council direct town staff to prepare the necessary requests for proposals, to contract the required architectural, engineering, design, and project management firm to to prepare all the necessary design drawings, specifications, and construction tender documents for all upgrades included in the police building costing estimates. And the council approved funding in the amount of $233,000 from the General Capital Reserve Fund to cover the estimated costs of architectural, engineering, design, and project management fees associated with the building upgrades. And the council approved $1.1 million for the necessary upgrades to the existing facility to meet the OPP requirements, inclusive of the above architectural, engineering, design, and project management fees. May I have a motion? Deputy Mayor McIntosh, seconded by Councillor Sherwood. Any further discussion? Seeing none, call the vote. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Taylor opposes. 11.5, County of Dufferin and Local Municipality Service Delivery Efficiency Review Steering Committee elected representative appointment. Recommendation, the council appoint one of our elected representatives as a representative to the County of Dufferin and Local Municipality Service Delivery Efficiency Review Steering Committee. I know we had Councillor Post. Sorry? All right, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I'd just like to put forward Councillor Lisa Post. I'd like to nominate her for this position, please.
Okay. Good. We have a seconder for that. Deputy Mayor McIntosh. Any further nominations or comment on this? Seeing none. Okay. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship. I would also like to nominate Councillor Andrews.
Okay. Good. Do we have a seconder for that nomination? Councillor Peters. Okay. Does somebody have a coin? Okay, I'm not quite sure how to proceed here, Madam Clerk.
Well, you could proceed by taking a vote on one and see if you get a majority vote.
Right. Okay.
Because you had two put on the floor, actually, so.
Right. Okay. All right. So I guess in order, we had Councillor Post nominated first. So, yes. All right, Councillor Taylor. Thank you.
Just as a solution, I mean, we're all a friendly bunch here, and I hate to vote for one over the other one, to be honest with you. Would it be possible as a solution that we have one represent with an alternate? Would that be a potential, and potentially maybe, you know, Post and Andrews decide who that's going to be on their own, as opposed to putting us in an awkward spot here?
Okay. So would that be Councillor Post as the representative and Councillor Andrews as the first alternate? Is that okay? All right. So, all right. Do we need to amend our?
Yeah. I would suggest then that we'll withdraw the previous motions that were on the floor, and we will just go with a new motion worded in that case and just get a new mover and seconder.
Okay. Councillor Taylor, you want to make that motion? Okay. Seconder. Deputy Mayor McIntosh. Okay. All in favor? Okay. That was unanimous. Thank you. Okay, now we're back to budget time. Madam Treasurer, you're going to give us another recap of our budget. Please carry on.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through Your Worship to members of Council, I have a very short presentation for tonight, just recapping 2020 budget that we have already presented on November 25th and November 26th. I'll start with the capital side of the budget and a recap of that. So the total capital requirement, levy requirement, is $2.6 million, and that is essentially the level that we have maintained from 2019. The transfer into reserve, again, is $3.6 million, and it is the same level as 2019. And therefore, these two items have zero impact in the 2020 budget. As Council would recall, back in August, I did bring a report to Council asking for direction, particularly to give a us incremental increase to both capital and reserve. I believe it was 0.5% respectively, and at the time, council decided to maintain the 2019 level, not just for 2020 budget, but for the next 10 years until 2029. So that was a council direction. And as staff were working on capital and reserve transfer budget, we made sure that we followed council's direction, and we brought back a budget based on 2019 level. Once again, I reiterate that 2.6 million for capital net levy requirement and transfer into reserve, 3.6 million is the same as 2019 level, and therefore zero impact for 2020 budget. The next slide is sort of a snapshot from our asset management plan. So our current asset management plan was undertaken back in 2016. So the numbers you're looking on the screen are essentially from that report. On the right side of the screen, there is a pie chart that kind of shows that almost 30% of our existing assets are anywhere between very poor to fair level. That means that we have to replace this asset at a fairly rapid speed. On that same pie chart, you can also see that almost $200 million worth of replacement cost will be required between the next 5 to 10 years. On the left side of that same screen, it shows our annual funding shortfall, otherwise known as infrastructure deficit. Again, this is from the 2016 asset management report. Currently, we are sitting at $5.35 million. I repeat that, $5.35 million in infrastructure deficit. So you need to look at the two sides of the coin, so to speak. At one end, we have almost 35% of our assets that require immediate replacement in the next 5 to 10 years, and we're looking at the tune of $200 million, and that estimation is based on 2016 data. On the other side of the screen, you're looking at a shortfall of 5.35. So every time we either, for lack of a better word, stifle our incremental increase to capital envelope, or even reduce it, that delta will grow bigger. In 2020, we're scheduled to do our next run of asset management plan, which is, by the way, a requirement by the province. And I would suspect that council will find that 5.35 million infrastructure deficit will actually grow. To what amount, we don't know yet, but that is kind of the correlation between sort of keeping capital asset spending limit at a status quo and not looking at it through the lens of asset management. So I just wanted to tie that two in. Moving forward on the operating side of things, so in 2019, our consolidated net levy, we had 35.6 million. In 2020, we are asking 36.6, and these are kind of the drivers that are leading us to that mark. One-time reversal, we're looking at 90,000. Inflationary impact, a little over 67,000. Previously endorsed items total 233,000. One-time items, 387. Any service level impact, we're looking at 380. And any operating impact coming out of capital projects, we're looking at 136,000. So those are essentially the recap from our last two presentations. So overall, as council is already aware, our consolidating operating requirement or net levy requirement is 36.6 million, which is a little over $1 million as from last year, which translates into 2.85% before any growth. After growth, we're looking at 1.50 or a little over $500,000. This slide kind of gives you an idea where town of Orangeville sits in terms of our tax rate and how we compare. BMA is a consultancy firm out of Toronto, and they do this, or they run this study every year to kind of get a sense of where municipalities are, and sort of they look at their different KPIs or key performance indicators. So municipal tax rate, and this is coming out of our 2019 BMA study. So if you look at the left-hand side of that graph, the green bar essentially shows the maximum tax rate within the province. The blue is the minimum. provincial median and average is depicted through the yellow and the gray, and town of Orangeville obviously is depicted by the orange bar. And as you can clearly see that town of Orangeville's tax rate vis-a-vis our provincial comparators, we are slightly above the provincial median or the provincial average. We're nowhere near the top 10 percentile or top 10 of the echelon. So this is kind of the overall positioning of town of Orangeville vis-a-vis our tax rate in comparison to our provincial average, so to speak. The next slide kind of shows us and kind of basically puts us in our own weight class, so to speak. So BMA uses 15,000 to 30,000 population as a weight class. So within that scenario, so we have municipalities like Bracebridge, Brockville, Owen Sound, Midland, Port Colborne, Strathroy, Caradoc, and so on and so forth. So the green bar toward the far right end shows the average of all of the other municipalities in that weight class. And then you can see town of Orangeville again depicted by the orange bar. So once again, you can see that we are trending slightly above the average within our weight class. So I just wanted to bring these two slides to your attention because I have heard either through council or through ratepayers that we are somehow in the top 10 or maybe one of the trendsetters when it comes to tax increases. So I just wanted those two slides to kind of show that or sort of, give you a different perspective on that. So to, that's correct, Your Worship.
Yeah, exactly what is that?
So that's the municipal tax rate, the municipal, not the county or school board, just the municipal portion of a tax bill or the tax rate. So the tax rate is essentially the amount of money that you are required to run an operation divided by the weighted assessment that is available to a municipality.
Okay, the weighted assessment. Okay, fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So moving on, like I said, this is a short presentation. I just wanted to do a quick recap. So our recommendation tonight for council on the capital side, that 2020 capital budget as presented in the amount of 15.2 million be approved. That the 2021 to 2029 capital forecast as presented in your budget book be adopted in principle. Recommendation on the operating side, that the 2020 one-time reversal items totaling 90,400 be approved, that the 2020 inflationary impact items totaling 67,444 be approved, that the 2020 one-time items totaling 387,499 be approved, that the 2020 service level impact items totaling $380,760 be approved, that the 2020 operating of capital items totaling $136,352 be approved, and finally, that the 2021 to 2024 operating budget be approved in principle. Consolidated recommendation that council approve 2020 consolidated budget at 1.5% levy increase. And that ends my presentation for tonight. Thank you.
Sorry, there you go.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Syed. Could we go back to those to the slides where the mayor was asking the questions on your graphs there? I think that's an excellent slide. I'm curious, one more up. Yes, this one here. Oh, yeah, the other one, if possible. Oh. With the bars. This one? Comparative with the other municipalities. Yes, please. This one? No, the comparative one that's the one. Okay. For this one here, I love the visual of it. I would love to understand what the absolute number of the average or the median or mean, however that you're phrasing it, versus us. What is that number? You explained it to the mayor, what it was you were pulling, but, you know, what is the number for Orangeville and what is it for the average or mean?
Madam Treasurer.
Through your worship to Councillor Taylor. So again, we don't have the exact numbers or the exact rates there, but what I can tell you, I think the average for this section or for this class is somewhere between 2.89 to 2.7 for this group. And I believe, and I do not want to misquote myself here, but I believe our Town of Orangeville 2019 tax rate is somewhere around 1.8 or 1.79. So I don't have the exact number on me, but really the idea is to kind of show you that how do we fare vis-a-vis or in relation to municipalities that are more comparable to us. So you cannot necessarily, and no disrespect to some of our surrounding municipalities, but the town of Mono or Ameren, they're not exactly our comparators. So this study kind of shows you sort of the comparator municipalities for us. So I hope I have answered your question. I do not have the exact number here, and I can send that to you later on, but this kind of shows you where we sit in terms of some of our comparators.
Okay, Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, just procedurally, I know at a previous meeting there was a question if we could bring up the actual budget pages as we're going through the discussion. Are you ready to do that this evening? Perfect. Didn't have to be right away. I just was hoping that would be available. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Peters.
Sorry, I'm at it again. Through you to Ms. Syed, I know last time we spoke, we talked about approving as a whole. As we sort of pick through these items, how are we keeping track of what's being removed or altered or added so that we have a good sense of the budget as a whole when that motion is eventually made, if you understand what I mean? Like if we pull out items A and B but add C and change D in a dollar amount, is someone keeping a list, so to speak, so that we can have that in front of us when we go to make the motion for the final approval?
Madam Treasurer.
Through your worship to Councillor. So I have provided sort of a recap of all our recommendations. So if you are looking at our capital budget, which is 15.2 million, and as I've already explained, the 2.6 levy requirement is essentially the same as 2019. So as you're approving our budget tonight, that could be one way of going about it, is taking the recommendation as presented and looking at them and approving one by one. In terms of if you're going through items within the capital budget, then the Deputy Treasurer and I can keep track of that. I'm looking at the CAO if he has anything else to add to it.
Mr. Brennan.
Your Worship, through you, I'm not sure if I have anything to add. Maybe if council, another way of doing it, if there seems to be a lot of changes and you don't want to accept a 1.5%, what staff has done is come back with what they foresee as a requirements in their areas of expertise and in their departments. If council is not in favor of a 1.5% increase, maybe indicate to us what your increase is comfortable with, and staff can go away and come back and try to rate the priorities between the departments and bring it back to council and explain what the impact would be to decrease or increase to get to the areas that you're happy with regards to a tax levy.
Deputy Mayor McIntosh.
Thank you, Your Worship. I personally am happy with the 1.5. I talked to you before, and we mentioned that there's some items in here that I feel wants, not needs. They're not big items. You had mentioned that if we approve the 1.5, how would we then get to those items that I feel are wants, not needs? They're all small items, but, you know, if we approve 1.5 right now, then these items are going to go ahead and get done, correct? Or am I not quite correct?
Madam Treasurer.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to the Deputy Mayor. So I don't know the specifics of the items that you mentioned. So first of all, if you're looking at a 1.5% levy requirement, and you want to see either a decrease or increase to it, then you have to look at projects that are levy funded, or some portion of it is levy funded. Otherwise, it will have zero impact on that 1.5%, right? So if you are looking to either remove items or include items, and like I said, I don't know the specific of what items you're looking at. So once we go through the conversation and discussion tonight, perhaps I can better advise you once I know the specific of the items that you're looking at.
Okay, because I personally, and I'm not speaking for the rest of council, I personally would support a 1.5, but again, there's some items in here that I don't support, but I don't want to fall behind on our, you know, our replacements and stuff like that. But anyway, I'll let somebody else talk. Thanks.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to the Treasurer, I'd just like to say, oh, wait. I think the budget is excellent. I think the thought process that went into it, I think the way that it's laid out for us, it's very simple for me to understand, which is great with my limited capacity. So it's perfect, but I'm with the Deputy Mayor. I'd like to debate the issues. And Your Worship, I'm not sure what your plans were for this evening, but I'm ready to dive into some of these things with page numbers and thoughts and questions. And I don't see us approving a 1.5% increase today. And it's not that I'm against 1.5. It's just, it's to the Deputy Mayor's point. There's some things in here I'd like to have discussion with each of you about and align on where we're going to go as a team. So that's my thought.
Okay. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship. Could I recommend that we just start with each department capital project summary? And then we can just go, like we start off with corporate service, the summary of the capital projects. Let's go through all the capital projects. And if an individual councillor has a query about wanting to pull something out or add something, I think that would be the best way to go. And it's almost like a whole summary that we had last time where, you know, we can start off, like I say, with page 23, I believe, is the first department summary of the capital. Let me just see, not 23. So we go to corporate allocations, page 25. So if we look at each capital budget appendix, this would give an opportunity for each council member to then express, are we happy with all of these items that are here, or do we have a concern or a recommendation about, this is how I'm proposing that we approach. We start at the top, each department, go through their capital budget summary, see if we have any reductions. Let's get a tally at the end of what we've asked to have removed or added, and see what that potentially does with our tax rate. And then this allows us discussion with each department head or general manager to further explain why we potentially want to add or cut. Is everybody in favor of doing it that way, Treasurer?
Yes, okay. All right, well, if we follow that, we've got page 25 here, corporate allocations. Does anybody have any issues with this particular page? Councillor Taylor, you wish to speak to this?
I'd just like to say that for corporate allocations, I am in full agreement with what town staff has put forward, and I know we don't make a motion, so I'll just informally suggest to the rest of council that we move on to, I guess it'd be, and it's not that I'm looking for things, but just in a linear fashion here, Orangeville Police Service comes up next.
Yep.
So I would suggest that corporate allocations are good.
Yes, agreed. No, let's just go ahead, and we'll just... that is page 34, capital summary for police. So obviously, since this budget was prepared, there's been a issue on changing. There is some expense here, which I think maybe we could ask our IT director, Mr. Hall, could you weigh in a little bit on this, sir? Because many of these expenditures are IT-related or technology-related. So I wonder if you can give us a little guidance on this. What is needed to get us through the next, let's say, 9 months of the Orangeville Police Service?
Right, so there's 4 projects from an IT perspective in the capital summary for Orangeville Police Services. Councillor Sherwood did actually reach out to us yesterday with regards to some clarifications on that. Because it's early days, not knowing exactly what sort of duration, what some of these technologies are going to be required to be left in place post-transition, because some of the systems that are due for replacement are things that are for our surveillance system, things that may be required post-transition for privacy requests or investigations, things like that. So what I did was review those 4 capital projects and looked at the ones that we could remove or reduce. And there's the first one, which is the firewall refresh. That's typically based on a 5-year period. We would reduce that to a 1-year period, so that would reduce the cost by about $8,000 on that one particular item.
Okay.
The second one, which is the storage area network, we can't really adjust that unit cost because, again, there could be data that we have to maintain post cutover for police services investigations. And then the workstations and server refresh, that one, what I'm suggesting we do is go with simply a break-fix scenario where we just replace ones that fail as it goes, as opposed to doing a standard refresh across the board. Mm-hmm. By doing that, we can reduce that ask from $62,000 down to $20,000.
Okay.
And then the phone system is a little bit different. Their system is up for a refresh on the server side of it, the back end, and that system is compatible with our system. So we have to do it because they are a secondary public answer point. So it is critical in nature that system is running until transition. But the nice part of that is we can actually migrate that hardware into the town system post-transition and offset our capital requests for next year as a result of that.
So to recap that, we've got $50,000 to come off the 195. Is that correct?
Correct. I would include that there is a vehicle in there that I'm not aware of.
So I'm going to ask Mr. Taylor this. What do you think about buying a vehicle right now?
Sir.
Okay. You're back. Go ahead.
We should hand that job over to Councillor Peters and see if he could be your Sherpa or something tonight. You know, Your Worship, I don't see a need to spend that money either. I'd like to remove that. And on top of that, I'd like to have the discussion, and I feel like Councillor Sherwood will have some thoughts on this as well. But I look at the funding of this, and we should all be looking at the funding. I'm not lecturing anybody, but we should be looking at the funding of this for each of us. And I'd like to have the debate about the monies that we're going to spend, which, by the way, I'm aligned to, so thank you. Where would it come from? Would it come from the tax levy, or would it come from the reserves? Because if you look here, it was 147 to reserves and 48,000 from the tax levy. And I just think that we should all kind of hug and debate on this a little bit of where it would be. I'll keep nattering. My personal bias at this point would be we're low already. We've just made it lower. I would suggest that it comes from the tax levy as opposed to our reserves, because we're going to need them as we make some other decisions about where we'll go with lump sums and whatnot that we have to pay for. So my suggestion would be no car and tax levy for whatever's left over. And I'd be interested to see what you have to say.
Again, recapping this, it looks to me like we've got 145,000 less 60, or 85,000 now is the ask for capital for the police service. Is everybody in agreement with that? And Madam Treasurer, what are your thoughts about what Mr. Taylor is suggesting? Is this to come out of levy, all of it, you're saying, Mr. Taylor?
Yes, it's not very much, so.
But we are increasing the tax levy from 48 to 85 here, rather than splitting it between reserves. You want to add the levy, onto the levy right now, or you think there's going to be other subtractions? That,
I think there'll be other subtractions.
Yes. Councillor Sherwood, sorry. Your thoughts?
So what you're doing is if you're looking at the summaries attached, it shows each project, whether it's coming from reserves or tax levy, right? So for example, Mr. Hall is recommending that we change the firewall refresh to $8,000. That will be the tax levy, but we're removing the vehicle, the 60,000 is coming from reserves. And the same with going to the workstations. I would like to go with what Mr. Hall is recommending on those amended amounts, that hopefully the treasurer and the deputy treasurer are able to make those figures as we go. But again, it's just affecting reserves. So what you're saying, Councillor Taylor, is we need to have direction from our treasurer whether that can be put over to, because right now, I only look right now, by this decision that we're making right now, we're only reducing the tax levy itself by $8,000. Everything else is being affected by reserves. So I'll let the treasurer answer that, but I would like to support the recommendation by our IT.
Yeah. Okay. Madam Treasurer.
Thank you, Worship. Through your worship to council, when I was presenting the recap, one of the things I did mention is that as you're looking through the capital budget envelope, and if you're looking at either tax reduction or increasing the levy, if you're looking at projects that are either purely funded through reserves or has a higher reserve level funding, in terms of proportion, then you are really not making much of an impact on the tax levy side. So one of the things I would, again, respectfully suggest tonight is that if you go through, as you are right now, some of these projects, and then let us know the ones that you absolutely either would like to take out or would like to add, whichever way that goes. And then perhaps staff can take that direction tonight, go back and look at the numbers and then present that back to you, as opposed to trying to figure this out in real time. It's just a suggestion. So like I said, we are only on police services capital budget. There are more to go down the line, but I think right now to figure out whether taking out a 60,000 here or a 30,000 there, what the impact would be. You can leave that to staff and we can work on that. But like I said, as you're going through these items, unless these items are either fully tax funded or has a heavy impact on tax levy, removing it won't make much of a difference on the 1.5% side of things.
CAO or GM? Ms. McKinney.
Thank you, through the mayor. Just to reiterate what the treasurer is saying is we're happy to take the suggestions and come back with the calculations, because in addition to what the treasurer is saying is there's risk in trying to do this real time. So we're not going to be trying to figure out what is a portion to the reserve, what is a portion to the tax levy, and moving it around on live. Instead, we'll take the list, which was the request, we'll put together the summary and come back with it.
Okay, so we'll just continue on. So to recap this page, we've got firewall refresh reduced to 8,000. Vehicle ask is deleted. The SAN is kept at 32,000. Workstation server refresh reduced to 20,000. Phone system upgrade left at 25,000. Correct, councillors? That's what we were, okay. All right, so let's move on then to corporate services. Yep. Let's go to page 46. Finance, capital budget appendix, capital summary. I think we're good here. Okay. Now we got clerk's department. Again, capital summary is just a photocopier. Everybody good? Okay. Let's move on. Page 56, bylaw enforcement, no capital request. All right, now we're on to IT, which is on page 60. Right. So the digital first strategy is a big item, but that's something we've all been pushing on this council. So Council Peters, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I hate to go back. I know there were
Oh.
no 2020 items on page 56. But again, we'll be sort of approving these in principle if we have something to bring up. I think now is the opportunity as we're going through it. So
Okay.
I just noticed that the two bylaw vehicles there have an allowance. I know some people on council and in the greater community have spoken about maybe looking at electric vehicles, whether that's through an actual official, not a bylaw, but a policy that's put in place at town level. But I wanted to ask the question of this table and perhaps of Ms. McKinney or someone else who's knowledgeable on the subject. Should we, if we're considering that, should we be looking at these numbers, or do we perhaps think in a couple of years those will afford electric vehicles, for example? Again,
Prices seem
not
to
something we
come
have
down.
to discuss right away, but I thought I'd at least bring it up at this point.
Yeah. Well, 25,000 doesn't buy you much of a vehicle these days. And it certainly won't be electric. Unless there's, a trade-in factor that's in this number, but I imagine those vehicles are, I'm sorry? No, I think we purchased them, correct? We're purchased, yeah, so. I hear you loud and clear. I mean, I'm a fan of hybrid and electric vehicles. I'd like to see the town try and embrace that if they can, but they are more costly. Yeah. But in terms of doing anything now, I mean, other than acknowledging your comment, I don't know. Is there anything? Yes, Ms. McKinney, I'm sorry.
Through the mayor, we can certainly take that into consideration and update it for next year.
Right. Is that satisfactory? Okay. Councilor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship, with regards to the information technology, this may not be a capital budget. I may be jumping into operating, but Ms. McKinney could probably help me with this. I've had several people reach out to me regarding closed caption with our live streaming. I've had many discussions with you. I know there seems to be some hiccups. Is there somewhere in this budget that I can be reassured that we're looking at getting those softwares to implement those to work smoothly?
Ms. McKinney.
Through the chair, yes, there is. We've been looking at costing with other municipalities. Karen's actually taking the lead on that, reaching out to some of her contacts. And the cost is not expensive. I think it's something we can manage.
So it isn't part of this capital IT, any type of...
It's not specifically named, but we could get it done as part of our website work.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay, so can we roll here on page 60? Everybody's happy here? Yep. All right. Sorry. Manager, Human Resources, here we go. Sorry. Page 69, so we have nothing here. All right. 79? I'm sorry. Okay. Okay. So there has been some discussion about spreading the pumper purchase out. There's been a bit of pushback, I guess, on it. Can you maybe go over this with us, Madam Treasurer? I mean, the vehicle is going to take a year or more to purchase it, right? There's a lead time. So spreading this 800,000 out over a 2-year period, what are the pros and cons of that, please?
Thank you, Your Worship. So through Your Worship to Council, generally speaking, in terms of equipment or vehicle purchase, there needs to be an upfront financial commitment. So in my previous jobs and what I'm aware of through other municipal budgeting, when it comes to vehicle and equipment, you want to make sure the commitment for the entire amount is in 1 year or upfront. In this particular case, the actual delivery of the vehicle can be over 2 years, but I would highly recommend that the commitment for the funding envelope be in the same year.
Okay. I think I saw an email come from Mr. Osmond. You said at least 70% should be in this year. Is that correct, sir?
That's correct, Your Worship. What I advised was that when we purchase a piece of equipment, after we do the tender or RFP, depending on how we do it, once that contract is signed, it takes 280 days to actually fabricate this particular unit, and that would take us into 2021. What would happen along the way is that we would inspect the vehicle at certain timeframes, and then progress payments would be made as the vehicle's hit certain timeframes, and then we would find ourselves paying the final payment in 2021 once the unit is delivered.
Let's go to Councillor Taylor. Sorry. There we go. Over to you.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to talk about fire and the fire department and what we're going to do here. So, first of all, I'd like to say to the fire department that's probably watching this, I think that they do a fantastic job. Key members of our community, and we need to support them for sure. I looked through the budget here. They got a well-deserved raise, which I'm pleased that they got. I'm happy to support that. And then you look at the items that are here. It's an expensive year for the fire department. I'll preface this by saying, maybe I'll just go back. I am firmly on the bus of what was decided last week. So it's not about that at all. I'm thinking about the monies now that we need to lay out as a team for where we're going to go with transition costs and whatnot. So I'm very sensitive to items that are on this agenda. I see the pumper here for the $800,000. Don't deny that we need one. I think that we do. I see the radios on here. I read the report. Don't deny that we need them. I think that we do. And then I see the bunker gear that's here. I mean, I don't want anybody that works for the town of Orangeville to be in a spot where they're unsafe. That's not what I want whatsoever. But those three items are $1 million. I'm fine. Let's check mark each of them and be pleased and proud that we did. I look at the fire station, though, at $3 million, of which we don't have the money for. There's a common theme here. We don't have the money. We don't have the money. I'm not in favor of borrowing for something that we don't have property for yet. I think we've firmly got the cart before the horse. I think that there's tremendous amount of things on our agenda as a council that we need to figure out as a team that I'm with all of you people. We're going to figure this out together. I don't know exactly what we're going to do about the financing yet. We're going to get through it. I just think at this point for 2020, this is the wrong move for us. So my diatribe here is not about we don't need a new fire hall. My diatribe is I'd just like to push this back a little bit. So I don't know what my suggestion would be. I'll defer to potentially Councillor Sherwood and your financial advice. But at the very least, I'd like to see that $3 million come out of 2020. And whether it just pushes all the way back and it goes 2021, 3 million, 2022, 5, and 2022, 2. And I recognize that this will cost us more with inflation, right? As you push back decisions, it does impact us. I have angst about this 3 million. We don't have a plan for it right now. Things aren't laid out in a way that I'm comfortable with. So I guess to finish off, I would say pumper, yes. Radios, yes. Bunker gear, yes. Love you, fire department, yes. Push this somewhere else, the 3 million, and I'll defer to the rest of the team to say what they think should happen.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor McIntosh.
Thank you, Your Worship. I do support your thoughts on the fire hall. As far as the pumper, I was originally thinking basically half now, half next year, but I don't like pushing it back to next year. There's nothing on here that I would cut off that we're going to have to buy next year. It seems silly when we're at 1.5 to push something back a year that might make next year 1.75 or more. So I'm certainly in favor of doing the pumper all in 1 year, just for the record. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I actually had a different comment, but I guess we'll stick with the one at hand. I don't fully support your thoughts on the fire hall. I think we have other capital projects coming up, and if we push one, we're pushing 3 or 4. This was already delayed. This was a decision or something I'm sure the town wished had happened a little while ago. So I don't really want to take that same position and be deferring into the next term or the next couple of years with some of these projects. I don't like the borrowing piece any more than you do, Councillor Taylor, trust me. I think there's other ways to do it. There are federal grant programs for high-performance buildings, for example, that would have much lower borrowing costs with high grant potential. So I'd rather earmark it and then shoot to be under it through various programs and incentives, but I really don't want to push it off.
Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship. I'm going to just maybe add to what Councillor Taylor was talking about. I have a real problem with this $3 million. It is a debt that they're asking us to take on right now. We don't have the money. But again, I appreciate what you're saying, Councillor Peters, but I'm actually was hoping that we could actually delay this, not even until next year, but even further to kind of piggyback onto when we reach into the billing model with the OPP into 2024, where if there's a difference of $3 million in police costing, then we can start putting things like $3 million aside for that without having to go into debt. So I'm actually in support of Councillor Taylor's initial thoughts here, because I just don't necessarily support it at this time, especially since we aren't sitting there saying, okay, we have the land now and we're ready to build.
Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, and this has been some healthy dialogue, and I think it's been helpful for all of us sitting and listening. I do also agree with some of the points that Councillor Taylor has pointed out. We've had dialogue between the staff, we've had dialogue here at the council table, and when we look at things outside of a plan, sometimes we're guessing. And I really do appreciate the point that, we do have a fire hall that, as has been reported to us, that may need to be upgraded. And with the utmost respect for our firefighters and the entire team that do an incredible job, and has already been echoed here at the table. But I do like the idea of deferring, and I feel that, if we are going to look at this in a strategic fashion, we have to have a plan in place. There's so much ahead of us from a capital investment perspective that we have to take a look at this in a way that's strategic, and it's not going to end up being overly impactful. So I think that I would certainly support some of the points that have been shared from my fellow councillors, the idea of targeting the pumper and some of the other items there. But if we can look at maybe accurately deferring what would be that sweet spot for deferring it further down the line, that's something that certainly would have to be forwarded possibly by staff. But at this point, I will certainly support some of the points that have been shared.
Thank you. Councillor Post.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Can I perhaps ask Mr. Osman or Ms. Syed what the $3 million right now is being earmarked for, and by pushing it, what are we potentially doing? I think we need to know the ramifications of that, and why, when we don't have property right now, why we're asked to take out a $3 million loan in this year. I just want some clarification as to what that's going to be used for, and if it's something that would be advisable to be pushed back at this point.
Madam Treasurer.
Through Your Worship, to Councillor Post. So the $3 million is the overall costing or the costing envelope for 2020. We're not taking $3 million debt, we're taking 2.4. So as I'm listening to all of you, pushing this project a year or two will just, how should I put this? At the end of the day, you're just pushing the tax levy increase to future year. And the other part of it is cost of borrowing today versus cost of borrowing 3 years from now will be very different. So that's one of the considerations that you need to keep in mind as you are deliberating through this. So I will leave it at that, and I'll toss it over to GM Osmond.
Mr. Osmond.
Thank you, Your Worship. My only comment on this is that we have a facility right now that's was been earmarked for replacement. There was strategies done, or plan done in the fire master plan. There's issues functionally with the building. From a perspective of being prepared or planning, what I would ask consideration on is that while we're not going to be constructing a building in 2020. What we need to do, once we have the land question settled, is that we need to have funding to at least to start the design process on that building, or we won't be ready for 2021 or 22. And that's the big concern I have. We have the same situation now with, and I don't want to use it, but you're using Tony Rose. Tony Rose, if we were to do the planning process, we would be having something in front of you to say, here's the answers on this building. We have a similar situation with the fire station. The fire station right now, albeit we're waiting for the land question, we have questions out on the land all over the place. Once that land issue is settled, we'd like to have at least the funding to do the design piece on that building, so we're ready for the next process of tendering and going for construction in the year 2021, 22, 23, and you can push it any year you like after that, but at least we'll have the design work done and ready to move on a fire station and give you the look and feel for a building that you're trying to build here based on what the operational plan is for for fire operations.
Deputy Mayor McIntosh.
Thank you, Your Worship. One of the side notes to this, the best location for that fire hall is exactly where it is. If it wasn't for the Credit Valley Conservation, we could put an addition on there and everything would be fine. I'd like to see us push that a little more to see if we can convince Credit Valley to let us build there. It would certainly save us a ton of money, and I don't know if there's another location in town where we can put one. And just carrying on with that, did we not put money in the budget last year for a location study? How did that work out?
Mr. Osmond.
Your Worship, to the Deputy Mayor, we have funding in the budget for us to look at the site once we have the site located. I understand the concern with CVC. We have another meeting with CVC coming up in the next few days on a couple of different sites. Within the issue we have, of course, we're in the floodplain or floodway. It depends on which one you want to look at. And the first feedback we have from CVC is that you don't want us to do any development in the floodplain based on regulations and so on. And we've dealt with that, but we have nothing in writing. So now we're going to have an actual on-site walkthrough and see what we're doing on the site. And you're not incorrect. The best site from a fire perspective is where it is, or somewhere within so many meters of that particular site, which puts us in basically in the industrial park, if you would. And so we're looking at various sites, and it's taken a bit of work to try to get people to come back and say, hey, we're interested or not interested. The first step we're doing right now is to get CVC to the property, to have an on-site view, and then give us something in writing on next steps.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just as a sidebar, and I mean this is no spite to anyone, and obviously our former chief would understand this, but I've chatted with numerous people on that fire department. They've never seen water come anywhere close to that building and the whole entire time that it's there. So it's very frustrating to me that we're in the spot where we'd have to lay out millions of dollars and the CVC won't work with us on that building. I would be completely aligned with the Deputy Mayor, and that is I'd much rather see us do a renovation on a site that we already have as opposed to going through the hoops that I find I guess I'm speaking more as a citizen than a councillor, but I find it very frustrating that we would be in that spot and have to lay out that kind of money. And then just one other comment, Your Worship, if I may, through you to the Treasurer. And I am completely aligned with what you're saying. I love the way you answer our questions and structure them. You're spot on. My suggestion would be, and the levy that's listed here is 603, and I know it's not quite 603. I'm on page 79. Because of the nuances with it, but the tax levy itself, the impact, is 603,945. And I know it'll be slightly different than that depending upon what projects is approved and whatnot, but for the basis of my limited financials, let's say it's 600,000, fellow councillors. My suggestion would be is that we would still keep some sort of levy in there, put to reserves in some sort of way, so that to the Treasurer's point, we wouldn't want to come in, like if you're 1.5 now, and I know the public would really want this, but you have to protect from a potential 8% increase at some point. So my suggestion would be is we take the 603 and still earmark, in some sort of way, but we don't borrow the money, we don't incur the cost of borrowing, but this 603 goes into some sort of general reserve and keeps us moving forward to the Treasurer's point, if that makes any sense.
Councillor Post.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, Mr. Osmond, for clarity on what you had said, if there's no location found at any point through this year, that 3 million will not be borrowed, is that correct? So it's pending us finding a location. So if nothing happens, that money's not going to be touched. So we're better off to leave it in there in case we need it, is my thought.
Councillor Peters.
That'd be correct, Your Worship, through to Councillor Post. That is correct. The big concern is the site, and we have looked at the site from a mitigation perspective, and that too is one of the things we've put before CBC, and that wasn't a plan that they would accept, so that's why we want to go back and revisit it, and they're coming to site. But you're correct, if we don't move on the land, we don't move on the project.
Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My comment was going to be very similar to Councillor Post. If we don't earmark it for this year, and we are granted the ability to renovate, or we do find a great piece of land, we're not borrowing it until we need it, and we don't want to wait until, say we find that in March, and we have to wait until next January for the 2021 budget to kick in, right? So, again, I would keep it in there and do with it the best that we can in 2020. And then to your comments, Councillor Taylor, the entirety of the hall itself is not in the levy, so that 600 is just for the other capital items, so I think it's already sort of accounted for in that regard.
I'm totally aligned with what Councillor Taylor said. We want to go down this path of renovation as far as we can before giving up, and but if we don't spend or earmark this money, it may come back to bite us in budgets in the next couple, 2-3 years. So I would be in favor of really just leaving things as they are. But let's go with Councillor Taylor one more time.
So if I may, to my fellow councillors, just there are other initiatives that this council is working on that should be settled before we decide on this piece. I'll leave it at that, but I think everybody understands where I'm going.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But the worst case scenario is maybe a really good thing, right? I mean, potentially, and extra money is always good, so we can, if that does come to pass. Deputy Mayor McIntosh.
Thank you, Worship. The last thing on this, again, it's kind of odd because we're borrowing the money, and I know some councillors in the past have been very hesitant to borrow money to fix things that are needed, and here we are going to borrow money for something that we might necessarily not be doing. So I just have trouble with that we're borrowing money to put in reserves.
But we're not. We don't need it. That's what I just clarified. We're not borrowing it unless we need it.
But then you could call into question whether it's needed, I guess, is just my thoughts anyway.
Yeah, I think if we approve this budget, that gives town staff the green light to do whatever with that money, right? So that's what we have to be concerned about. But I don't think they're going to do anything without consulting and let us know what direction they're going, whether it's renovation, purchase of land, or a new building. But once this is approved, it's a go. So. All right, so is there any other changes here? I know we did bounce around the fire truck a little bit, but it seems like that should probably just stay where it is from what I've... Councillor Post.
Thank you. Just one more question, perhaps to Mr. Osmond again. With the changes to the police service that were announced last week and the dispatching, is that going to add a capital expenditure to the fire department at all for their dispatch?
Your Worship, through Councillor Post, no, in actual fact, we pay a dispatch fee to police services out of operations, so we would actually go find another source of dispatch.
Okay, so I guess I'm going to make a suggestion that this page gets left as it is, unless there's any major pushback here. Councillor Sherwood, you're... I still oppose a $3 million microphone. Sorry. Go ahead, Councillor Sherwood.
I approve everything but the $3 million borrowing as I had suggested before. But that's okay if I don't get support from my fellow councillors. I totally respect what you're saying as well.
So before moving on this page, do we want to have a quick vote here on this? Are we leaving it as it is? I would make a motion that we do. Deputy Mayor McIntosh? No? You're not willing to second that? No? You want to, anybody else? Councillor Peters, do you want to speak to this?
Certainly, thank you. I would second it if we want to take it to a vote, or it sounded like Councillor Taylor wanted to circle back to this once some other things had been settled, and I'm fine to do that as well.
Okay. Let's earmark this for further, I'm sorry, Mr. Brennan.
Your worship, through you, we are not going to go out, town staff are not going to go out and borrow $3 million if it's not required. So if we don't borrow it, there's going to be no impact on the tax levy. With regards to location, we're also not going to go out and buy land that council is not going to be aware of. And if we can work with CBC and to get the existing site approved, and we can come up with a design that would meet the requirements of our fire for this community, that's exactly what we would do, and we would be coming back to council for that. Likewise, if we had to select a piece of land, we would also come back to council with designs of the property or of the facility that we would be proposing. So there is, there's no chance that town is going to go and borrow this stuff and move forward and start designing and building without keeping council abreast of what's going on.
Very good. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Your Worship. If I may, I'd just like to say, for me personally, and I think about conversations that I've had with residents, this is moving too fast for me, right? So we just had a big decision last week, and again, I'm supportive of that. I'm supportive of you as council. We have other things that are going on as well, and I really think we haven't said no to this, to Chief Morden, who's probably squirming right now watching. We have not said no. I'm just suggesting, can we get some more time here? And I'm not sure exactly what you'd like to have happen, Councillor Sherwood. I'd just like a year. So I'd really like this out of here. I don't want to make a decision on this today, given all the other financial requirements we have. If it was my own house, I'd be putting this off. And that's where my head's at.
Okay, we're going to circle back to this before we finalize things. So let's move on to page 90. This is our public library capital budget. The large item, the large ask here is expansion of the library collection. Of course, that's what libraries do. There's new books that come out, new digital books. This seems to be a similar level of ask going. Right, so I think we're all good here, folks? Okay. Sorry. 97, all right. Okay. Economic development. Yeah. So this is, you know, I'll speak first. This is the item that I still feel, although there's been some emails back and forth or some you know, clarity, I think, yet to come on the MTO requirements, although the email I read today from Mr. Osmond seemed to indicate that, you know, advertising or potential income is not there. The company that I spoke to that provided the digital sign in Shelburne for the town of Shelburne, which is near the beer store at Highway 89 and 124, I'm told that that is qualified as a billboard and that they can sell advertising on that sign, and that's where I'm coming from. So my thoughts are that we don't have enough information on this digital sign. I think there's opportunity to fund it privately, and I don't believe that's the right location for a large expenditure on a digital sign. I think there needs to be some more homework done on where on Highway 10 would be the best location. So that would be my recommendation, is to pull that item while we do some more research. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, and I will certainly support you on that particular decision, or at least suggestion. I think we need a little more information. As for another item that is on that list, which is the tourism strategy, I'm wondering if Mr. Osmond might be able to provide just a little bit of information for members of council on what the objective behind that tourism strategy would be, the report itself, and really what the department would be looking for.
Mr. Osmond.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Andrews. First of all, the tourism strategy was done 10 years ago, the original first tourism strategy or master plan, if you would. And this is the one that's on our docket for a 10-year follow-up. And there's been a lot of questions on tourism in Orangeville and certainly in the county itself. And over the last few weeks, I know that our manager, Ruth Phillips, has been meeting with the county to talk about, is there some opportunities here for collaboration, a joint project. We've applied for funding to the county to see if the county would provide some funding, because it does have a program to support municipalities within the county that are doing these kinds of strategies. So she continues to do that, and I think there's an opportunity there for that, and that's something we're just continuing to discuss. She's applied for funding from the county that could offset our cost of $50,000 for this particular project. I think what needs to happen here is a whole bunch of things. We've heard things from Roger Brooks as an example that's on our table that we're trying to figure out, well, what's the best way and route to take with some of this information. We've heard things about what's going on in downtown, what's going on with the square. Why do people come to Orangeville? Why is it a destination? How do we make it a bigger destination? What do we do with how people function and move around the downtown? The streets, the business, what types of business should be in our downtown? The tourism strategy gives you an overview of all those kinds of things and answers all those questions for you so that council can plan in the future now wants to spend dollars on tourism. Tourism also involves business. It gives business opportunity to have input into what they expect to see or what their expectations are with respect to tourism. It also looks at what's going on in the county. Now we align and now we can cluster events in the county so that if we're doing big events here, such as blues and jazz, when that's scheduled, how do we cluster that event with something else outside so that when you do come to Orangeville, albeit the big draw might be the Blues and Jazz Festival, but at the same time you can do something in a Shelburne or in Mono and it can cluster the event. You can also cluster within your own municipality so that when you do an event in Orangeville, how does that spin off and affect and impact the culinary community, if you would, or what have you, or what happens at the recreation side if we have a tournament? How does that factor in? And the sport tourism side. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to, after 10 years, I know we've had a lot of success with the last strategy. We completed 98% of it, things that came out recommendation-wise, and I think it's an opportunity now to take another look at Orangeville and where we're going to go in the next 10 years. Albeit there's a whole bunch of things in tourism, whether they're recreation, culture, whether they're culinary, whether they're festivals, and so on and so forth. So I think it's time to ask some questions, get some good feedback, and finish that strategy for the next 10 years and have some questions answered.
Well, Mr. Osmond, thank you for that clarity, because again, I think that it's one of those items that, again, members of council need to hear that clarification, and as the chair of the Business Economic Development Advisory Committee, it's been talked about most recently at our most recent meeting. And I feel it's imperative that we include that because, again, if we defer it another year or whatever, or just take it off the docket altogether, it's going to have some economic impact. And it's imperative that we have this tool because, again, it will have a connection to so many other departments within the organization. Okay.
I guess before I go to Deputy Mayor Mack, my only question is there's other organizations doing some tourism strategies as well, including Dufferin County. To some extent, the Dufferin Board of Trade is involved in representing tourism assets in this area. And also the BIA, of course, has just spent $25,000 on the Roger Brooks, destination retail report. I don't know, I wish we'd all get together and kind of pool it and come up with one tourism strategy for the region rather than everybody trying to do their own thing. But anyway, let's go with Deputy Mayor McIntosh.
Thank you, Worship. Back to the sign. I just want to support you 100% on this. I don't think we're ready for this. And overall, in today's economic restraint we're in, to me, this is a want, not a need. You know, it's going to look very pretty outside of town, a nice electronic sign. I remember when the electronic signs went up at the arenas, the public was not overly impressed with them and took it as a waste of money. But I just have concerns that this is a want, not a need. But I will support you in pulling that off. Thank you.
Okay, any other further comment here? So, is there some agreement here, councillors, on leaving the tourism strategy but pulling the sign for now, and we'll try and find a private solution on the signage issue, which I think is possible? Councillor Sherwood?
Yes, Your Worship, just back to the tourism strategy, I just want to get confirmation here. Are we not duplicating what the county is already doing then? If this is how I'm looking at it, is why aren't we waiting until the county comes back with a county-wide tourism plan and then see how we go from there? Because they would be including us in their study and their plan. So I'm looking at this as kind of being a duplication, but correct me if I'm wrong, if someone can maybe give me some education on that.
And we also know we're funding somewhere north of 40% of the Dufferin County budget to begin with. So anything they do, we're already chipping in big time. Councillor Peters, I'm sorry. Oh, Mr. Brennan, yes, sir.
Yeah, Your Worship, through you, with regards of tourism, economic development, and other areas of service that the county may deliver, the town also delivers certain areas. The county itself is not mandated to come and run the tourism for the town of Orangeville at this point. This has not been uploaded from the council, or from this council, this community, to the county of the county of Dufferin. In fairness to our staff do work closely with our colleagues at Dufferin County. The strategy being tourism, economic development, and some of these areas, they work very close together. If you look at, so again, like even if the county comes out with their plan, then if we do our portion of it, then it becomes a plan for not only Orangeville, but for the county as a whole. But I think we, as a community of 30,000 people, we've got to focus on what we need as the economic drivers, be it tourism, be it culture, and understand where we are and where we need to go with some of that as well. So again, we will certainly be working with our friends at the BIA, at the county, and potentially at some of our surrounding and neighboring municipalities as well, as we bring some of this stuff into focus.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think we can leverage whatever the county is doing, and whoever is brought in to do this work would certainly build on that, so that we're probably getting some inherent value from that report. But I still think a Made in Orangeville solution here is going to be critical, because even if we're 20–40% of that county, you know, they're trying to bring people to the region. We want to keep people within these boundaries, so to speak. I think that's our mandate here. So I think it's a modest amount. It's been a decade. And I like the idea of having a very specific solution. We have a different density, we have a different makeup of activities, so I'm in favor of keeping it.
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing is we're going to give staff direction to delete the digital sign ask and leave in the tourism strategy, which is funded 12,000 from reserves and 38,000 from levy. Okay, let's move on. I'm sorry? Pardon me? No, the 120's gone, right?
Yeah, the
so.
digital sign is 108 out of the tax levy.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
And 12,000.
Right, right. Okay, my apologies. Right. Okay. Our next item is 106, sorry. This is our Facilities and Parks Capital Budget Appendix. Okay, I think there were a few things on here that were of, I guess I'll start. If we look at the Alder exterior door and frame replacement for $20,000, there were two pictures in there. Unless there's more to it, it seemed like $6 with a Trumclad would have fixed that from the photograph, but I mean, there must be more to it. But being that we're looking at this grant, if that comes into play, do we need to do this door replacement, Mr. Osmond, now?
Your Worship, I'm in a bit of a conundrum, I guess. I have this ICIP sitting there, and I have a bunch of things in the budget that are really in a holding pattern until ICIP gets answered. And you're not correct, not incorrect. The issue is that if we get a bigger project, then we'll probably satisfy a bunch of things at Alder. The doors at Alder are a little over 15 years old now, and we have rust where the trim clad won't do it. We had to replace the actual units themselves and put new doors in. And that is not just for two doors, it's for pretty much all the doors in the facility over time.
Right.
On our asset management program, they're to be replaced. There's a whole bunch of other things in this budget that have in place. As an example, the liners for the pool. We scheduled those in a certain way because ICIP is a 3-year, possibly a 4-year a job to get finished. And we've triggered things that way so that if we get ICIP, the funding we have in our budget will cover off our share of the 9.3, 9.7, depending on how we fare out at the end of our budget. So there are things that are smaller in Alder that they're kind of things we had to do. If you can we hold them off? Potentially, yes, you could hold them off if we can cover it off in ICIP. My concern is that if we take it out and we don't get ICIP, then we don't get any of the work done. So that's the conundrum I'm in, if you would. So that's the kind of situation. The smaller pieces, like the doors, are things we can do, and whether they come out of ICIP or get done now, you can do one or the other.
Would you wait until that decision came down before you'd spend this money?
That I could agree to. I think that we're going to have an answer on this. My discussions with the government officials right now is we're probably looking at somewhere later in the spring, somewhere between March, April. See what happens at that point. It could even go into May month, because what happens is they're going to transition their piece and move it on up the line to the feds once they make their decisions, and then the feds make their decision and fire it back at us. So we're looking at what happens there, timeframes.
Okay, Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to follow up on that comment, I think there's probably a few items in there that I think Mr. Osmond could take that approach with, such as the AV equipment for Alder. Again, if there's going to be some reconfigurations, if we can hold off on pursuing that until we know what the final answer is. Separately, though, I have a question for Mr. Osmond and perhaps Mr. Hall. We've got cameras that we talked about last budget meeting at Alder. And then in 2021, we've got cameras again at Town Hall. Does it make sense to put those together? Is there an efficiency in pursuing a larger, perhaps more economic contract, or are these systems completely separate, or are there other issues I don't know about?
Mr. Hall.
Those two projects, they use the same system, so there is no issue with doing them all at once, but there's really no scales of economy by doing that either. So it's really probably just more of a manpower and timing issue to try and do that. So I don't see any benefit of doing them both at the same time.
Okay. Councillor Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I would like to talk about the rec centers. I guess to state my bias, a little bit about me personally. So I spend a lot of time in those arenas watching. I don't actually play. I watch 14-year-olds play hockey. And I guess my concern is I think about Tony Rose B, and I look at 2021, and we've got money in there. And I know we've got some different things going on as we approach, approach a decision about whether we'd spend $1.5 million on Tony Rose B. It is the worst arena I've ever been in. It's cold, it's dark, it's horrible to
but those dressing rooms.
And the dressing rooms they're meant for 5-foot men. Like it's honestly, it's the most antiquated outfit. So even if we don't get this arena, like something bigger needs to happen there. But I would rue the day that I would vote to spend $1.5 million to patchwork that facility right now. There's nothing emotional attachment to that whatsoever. It doesn't fit. So for me, my bias is that I'm happy to spend money on new doors at Alder. I think it's an asset that this town should maintain. We should be very diligent with that. It's something that everyone is going to. It's probably the most populated building in town for a meeting place. However, for Tony Rose, I don't want to spend a nickel on there right now. Not a nickel. So when I look at the Tony Rose interior signed for $7,000, cheap, Councillor Taylor, I don't want to spend a nickel on it. Tony Rose recyclable containers, I could be convinced, Councillor Peters, because I know that the facility is still going to be there, so I'll leave those in. But the Tony Rose LED lighting for $26K, I'm not in favor of that. The exterior furniture, although I read these things, Mr. Osmond, and I don't mean to offend you because I think that they're really well thought out and I think they would be wonderful. I just don't want to spend it there on that facility at this time. The concrete pad and the fencing, those garbage containers are disgusting. It would be great to have the concrete pad and the fencing up there, not to see it. I just don't want to spend the money. And then the last one is the Tony Rose chairs. All of these things add up to $66,000. I'll take out, and I'm just being facetious, I'll call them Councillor Peters recyclable containers. We should actually name them those, right? That'd be lovely. You take out those, and I'm down to $62,000 that I don't want to spend on Tony Rose. And believe me, it's not that I'm in favor of closing a facility. I want recreation facilities. My family enjoys them immensely. This is an antiquated building that is at the end of its life, and we need to be very careful with the taxpayers' money on that facility.
Right. I think even if the ISIP grant comes through, let's say April we get good news, we're going to spend, Mr. Osmond, at least 6 months, maybe 12 months designing whatever we're going to build. Then we're going to be probably a 2-year construction project. So we're out 3.5 years, probably. And only at that point are we going to be dealing with Tony Rose in any kind of major way as far as closing it. So I wonder about the LED lighting, Councillor Taylor. It seems like those kind of things sometimes have a payback, and I would expect some portion of Tony Rose is going to survive even after, if we are fortunate enough to get this grant. But I don't know, Mr. Peters. Anyway, I'll let you speak to that.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I struggle with this one as well, with the limited timeline. Depending on what's there, I don't recall exactly, I'm guessing T8 or T12 fluorescent fixtures, your LED payback is probably in the 3-year realm. So you're right there.
Yeah.
So, is a zero-sum game what we're after here? And is that money better spent elsewhere or better saved and put towards something else? It's hard to say, but we're going to be right on that cusp.
I'm on the fence. I mean, I could get swayed either way, but anybody else like to weigh in on Councillor Taylor's recommendation here? So just to recap that, you're saying spending no money, or just on the. I'm sorry, Councillor Taylor.
No, I'd like to put the Grant Peters recyclable containers in Tony Rose for $4,000. And other than that, I'd like to spend no money.
Okay. Councillor Post.
My suggestion at this point would be that anything that has to do with the rec services of any kind or the rec facilities, that we just push back until we hear back from that grant. Maybe we continue to earmark those funds as they are allocated right now, but with the understanding that they wouldn't be spent until after we find out about the grant. Because at that point, we're probably better equipped to have a conversation about the future of the rec facilities and make decisions about what we need to spend money on to get us through that build process and what we can perhaps hold off on. That would be my suggestion.
Okay. Any other comments, councillors here? Okay, Councillor Peters.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Post, I guess just to clarify, then you're advocating for these to be pushed back a year or to be kept as is with the potential shuffling of the deck once the ICIP, that second one, okay. So having money ready to be spent on the facility or contributing toward the ICIP instead, okay.
Right. Councillor Taylor.
Since we're discussing it, although I said I was in favor of everything related to Alder, Mr. Osmond, I would like to chat about the murals. I mean, if they were life-size pictures of Mayor Brown, I think that would be lovely. But at $20,000, I just wonder if we need it or not. And I appreciate what you're trying to do with the facility, so please don't take it as criticism. It's just, again, austerity times, right?
Right. Now, I'm also wondering, again, is there any kind of sponsorship opportunities there to, pay for those murals? Councillor Sherwood.
Yeah, I guess we can talk about the walking murals as we get to that part of it. It's not in the facilities and parks part here, right? We're just jumping a little bit ahead if we could, but I support what you're saying. But I'd like to give kind of my thoughts here. I've actually earmarked 5 items that I wanted, but 4 within facilities, so I don't want to jump to the next department, based on holding off on the ICIP, and that would be the Alder AV for the meeting room, which we've discussed, the Alder exit door, the Tony Rose interior signage, and the feasibility study for the rec hall. That would be like a $97,000 levy reduction if we were to hold off on all of those based on the ICIP grant.
Mr. Osmond, can you fill us in again on this feasibility business plan for regional recreation?
Your Worship, when we had proposed these funds for the regional facility, we weren't talking about ICIP. ICIP came after the budget was completed, and so essentially what you're looking at is a status quo operation. If we were to operate without knowing that was going to happen, we were looking at Tony Rose, and whether we would actually look at Tony Rose this way. You have 2 multiplexes in your community. One is 140,000 square feet. Tony Rose is roughly 100,000 square feet. The question the master plan is asking is, what do you need in facilities going forward in the next 10 years? One of the issues we have is that we have facilities that are being developed and constructed, infrastructure being constructed by the town of Orangeville. The question is that we are looking at all these different efficiencies at the same time. We're putting together a budget and we're saying, okay, we should probably consider, if we're looking at Tony Rose or something to replace Tony Rose in the future, should that be a facility that should be developed on a regional basis, joint facility basis? And that's why we put in the $60,000 to take a look at how should we look at that going forward. So we're basically going to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, answer the question on Tony Rose, and decide how do we develop the next facility. What came along in the meantime was ICIP, and ICIP, as we all understand it, we've basically redeveloped, if you would, expanded and so on, inside and outside the Alder facility, and in essence, that's your regional facility from our perspective. So this is kind of the situation we're in. We put those dollars on the table to deal with that so that we can bring all the neighboring municipalities to the table when we're having that discussion. We've had some discussions with neighboring municipalities on recreation and so on over the last few years. And one of the things we always have a discussion on is they actually come in and use our facilities and we discuss, well, should we have, surcharge, no surcharge, and those kinds of things. When you get into those kinds of debates, and you're now coming up to a facility that's at 50 years of age, and you're now asking the question, what's our next step? Population-wise, you could service the population of Orangeville with Alder and another piece added to Alder, which is what we've come to a conclusion on. However, we have other things that's come to the table since we just started discussing the future of Tony Rose, field houses, whether you're going to have a space for lacrosse internally, and so on and so forth. So that question still remains. However, ICIP will trigger a lot of different things. And your question on Tony Rose remains on the table, whether you do ICIP or not. You still got to answer that question. But we said we would hold off on that question until we had the master plan giving us some information on what the community are saying. And we heard in the last meeting, we have a little over 900 survey responses. That's given us some direction. We have stakeholder meetings that's all been completed, meetings with council, various stakeholders, and everybody in the community. We'll add that feedback. That report will be on council's table in May, and you'll have that direction from that particular document. So we did put the regional facility there because we were at status quo and not knowing where to go from here. And that was the strategy we were going to take.
So again, that money, if it was earmarked, it wouldn't be spent until we had a decision from ISIP, right? Yeah, okay. Councilor, sorry, Deputy Mayor McIntosh.
Thank you, Worship. To Mr. Osmond again, and I might have missed this in your last answer. If we don't get the grant, when will we find out the fate of Tony Rose?
Your Worship, through Deputy Mayor, I would suggest to you that when you get the master plan, you make a decision on Tony Rose. It'll give you the direction, it'll give you the feedback from the community, and it'll make you give you recommendations on a whole bunch of things. They could be pieces, they could be aquatics, they could be arena pieces. As an example, you have 4 pads. Do you need 4 pads? Do you need 2? Do you need 3? These are the kinds of questions that gets answered to the master plan, likewise in the pool environment. So it would be in May and shortly thereafter once you have the report.
In May. Thank you very much.
Councilor Sherwood. Sorry.
Yes, Your Worship, just to move things forward here, so I'd just like to go back and maybe we could tidy up some of these little individual items. So again, I'm putting on the table, based on the ICIP grant application and the status of that, I would like to remove from this budget the Alder AV for the meeting room, the Alder exit door and frame, the Tony Rose interior signage, and the feasibility study for the rec hall. To me, they're small enough items that they will make a minuscule amount on our budget today, but they won't really be a detrimental effect on next year's budget if we have to bring them in at that time. But at this time, I would ask for support that those 4 items be removed from 2020 capital.
Okay. Councilor Taylor, where do you sit on that particular, let's go with Councilor Peters first. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry to jump the queue there. Going back to Councilor Post's comments, I think something like the AV system should be budgeted for. If it's not executed, it rolls into the ICIP program because it's the same facility. I think that makes sense. The exterior doors, I think, need to be done regardless. And if we're talking about multiple doors, not necessarily just the side where the expansion could happen. So I'd be in favor of leaving those in. But yeah, agreed. The signage at Tony Rose and a couple other items that Councilor Taylor mentioned, I think could be removed on the Tony Rose side until we figure out what's going on.
Councilor Taylor.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Councillor Sherwood, for your suggestion. I'm aligned with Councillor Sherwood on everything but one. I'd just like to spend the money on Alder, so the doors and whatnot. I think it's a facility that I want to make sure that we're doing the right thing on. It's going to be there for a long period of time, and it's nickel dime, but I'd like to look after that as we go and as things are needed. So that's the only change that I'd make to what you're suggesting.
Mr. Brennan.
Your Worship, through you, it's a very good discussion, and I know this is with the ICIP. It's a complicating our budgeting and our ask. I just ask council to remember, though, if we do get ICIP, we need a matching fund. And I think what Mr. Osmond is saying is that a lot of these projects would not happen, but we would use the money that you're allocating as our matching money. So if we need that $7 million to match, and if we're going to be short by a couple $1 million, we're going to be back in the spring saying, hold it, we need another $2 million to match. So, at a 1.5 overall, I think we still have to consider that some of that money would be used as matching fund if we're lucky enough to get ICIP.
Mm-hmm. Madam Treasurer.
Just to add to our CEO's point, so when we have projects in our capital budget that are earmarked, For whatever reason, if we do not spend it, whether it's through reserve, through taxation, or any other funding sources, it stays in a carry-forward project reserve. So as our CAO said, in case we do get the ICIP grant, we do have to bring our percentage share. So therefore, any projects that are 4, 5, 26,000 or whatever, if we keep it as is and don't spend it until we understand where we're going with that grant, and then use that funding that's sitting in a carry-forward reserve toward our percentage of our share of the percentage that we need to bring to the table. In case we do not get the grant, then again, you do have this funding available to carry on with the projects that are already earmarked. So again, just to clarify and to add to what our CAO suggested, I think that would be a more prudent step toward this.
Thank you. Councillor Sherwood.
And I appreciate that and respect what you're saying, Treasurer, but the fact of the matter is, even if we're earmarking the money, we're still charging the taxpayers on this tax, on their tax bill in 2020, because it's still becoming part of the levy. So that's all I'm just saying, is it's still going to be part of the property taxes, even though we haven't used it, and you kind of would be tucking it aside. That's my only comment. So let's make some decisions on what we're cutting here. Let's start first off with the Tony Rose interior signage.
Off the table?
Can we all agree to remove that?
Yes? Okay.
And what about the feasibility study for the rec hall? I mean, I'm open to whatever you feel.
I think what Mr. Osmond said, that is, if we get turned down on the ICIP grant, that we need to move forward and, you know, with some decisions on Tony Rose. And that, Mr. Osmond.
Your Worship, when the decision is made on Tony Rose, my recommendation would be you move forward on the feasibility study on what you're going to do to replace or decommission or to repurpose or what have you with Tony Rose. It will trigger your next move, and the next move has got to give you, you got to make a decision on, and to make that decision is going to give you another stage to say, we need a feasibility study. My recommendation would be it would go regional, so you get all the regional players involved versus being a shot just for Orangeville itself. That's the trigger point for the $60,000. I don't have all my numbers in front of me now, but when I brought in the proposal on ICIP, just for clarification, there was $10 million allotted over a 3-year period that we had budgeted to make up that pot of money, if you would, for your contribution as a municipality, which is 26%, roughly 26 point something percent. That $10 million would be sitting there to be triggered if ICIP. And that's the point that the CAO is making, is that, you know, you can take it all now and put it in one pot and leave it that way if you like. At the end of the day, if it makes it easier, that, from my perspective, when we get a positive feedback from the government on this, it would trigger it. It all gets triggered over 3 to 4 years because it depends on the length of the project. The design phase of that project is going to take at least a year to design, and so you're going to be into 2021, 22, 23, 24.
Right. Councillor Post.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the comments that we've received from town staff, and I agree. I think it's important that we continue to have that money earmarked, because we've talked a lot through this entire council process about how frustrating it is to nickel and dime and constantly have people coming and asking for things. So I think what's going to happen is, regardless of what happens with the ICIP going forward, is that if it doesn't go through, we're going to have Mr. Osmond here in May asking us for this money, and where are we going to get it from? I think that the budget process is in place for a reason, that we've got these projects need to be done, and we can make a decision to hold them off until ICIP is decided on, and I think that that's the most prudent way going forward. I'm not in favor of removing a bunch of these items, knowing that if we don't get approved for it, they're going to come back in May or June, or they're going to hit our capital budget next year. And right now we're sitting at a fairly good target at 1.5. I know we want to move that needle down a little bit, but I'm concerned that by adding all of these projects in to next year's budget or pushing them forward, that we're going to be putting ourselves in a tough position come spring or summer, or through the next budgeting process, that all of these items are going to be on there. I think that there's some important stuff that's going to need to be done.
Okay, Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much. Absorbing sitting here at this end of the table and listening to all of my fellow councilors and the town staff. I thank you very much, Mr. Brennan, for your comments there, because again, we have to be aware of what is coming over the horizon and preparing for it, and the clarity that you've provided is, again, bang on. You know, we can, and no disrespect to any of my members of council, we can nickel and dime, but we have to prepare for the future. And we have some things, as Councillor Post was accurate, we have some things that could be coming at us in May, June, July, and we have to be prepared for it. If we're not, we're going to be diving into, you know, some other pool of money, and people are going to end up looking at us saying, you know, why did we do what we did? There are some things that we can, in fact, look at as we have, you know, we're not finished this process yet, and there's some other things on the operating side that we can also take a look at that may be part of that kind of, let's dice it a little bit, let's cut a little bit, but we have to be, I think, accurate in especially the capital side of this this budget process.
Okay, well, it sounds like we've kind of come back around here to maybe letting this roll as it is, from what Councillor Taylor? No? No, you're dead set against any spend at Tony Rose.
I'm the cheapest guy on this council.
Right.
Well, we remove the signage, right?
Yeah, the signage, I think we're agreed, but I just feel that Tony Rose is going to survive certainly another 3 or 4 years, and the LED spend, I think, is going to be recouped, if not more, by the time it dies, so, or whatever happens to it. So, Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was actually going to ask about the Tony Rose items and whether we're going through those again, because I assumed we hadn't quite resolved them. I have another comment, but I'll wait for the Tony Rose stuff to iron itself out. I think certainly, you know, some of the projects that Councillor Taylor mentioned, we could do without for a couple of years, not knowing the fate. And if in a year's time some of these come back to the forefront and we have more insight, you know, they can probably be done very early in 2021 without compromising them. So I'm happy to remove them at least for 1 year.
One of those issues was garbage containment. Is that right, Mr. Osmond? Is this neighbor complaints at all? Is there anything, or can you comment on that?
Your Worship, we're just trying to maintain our property. We did likewise at Alder, because this stuff has a tendency to move around and fly around, and it just keeps everything compact. Yeah, I mean, we can take it out and continue to do what we're doing right now. Again, it was a matter of operationally keeping things consistent with all of our buildings, and that's what we did with Alder, or did with Tony Rose in this case. I'd just like to, just for your information, the council, when we decide we get ICIP, Tony Rose is going to be the place to get to. We'll have things shut down in Alder off and on throughout this whole process, and Tony Rose will be well used for that period of time. So that next 3 to 4 years is critical for both our buildings. So when Alder pool gets shut down, as an example, we will continue to maintain and operate at full capacity at Tony Rose while we do the things at our main building, if you would, at Alder. Just keep that in mind.
Sure. Makes sense, yeah. Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I just want to make sure that I clarify, like, my son's there tonight with my wife. We'll be there tomorrow night, again, watching hockey again. So it's not, like, it's so important to me that these facilities are great. I just want to be cognizant, and I know everybody else here agrees, is that I don't want to spend money and then do something different and we've let that money go. I have great angst about that, but I think, I don't know, Councillor Andrews, you might be there more than I am, but I have to be second. And, you know, it's just really important that we have a vibrant facility for the community, and that's the only spot I'm coming at it, right? I don't want to waste the money. So I'm completely conflicted here, but I guess I still say, boy, I don't want to let the money go. So that's where I'm sitting.
Okay. So, did you want to say something further, Councillor Peters?
Different topic.
Okay. The only one that we're really 100% agreed to was removing of the Tony Rose interior signage, I think. What about the balance of this particular ask for facilities and parks? Did you want to leave it, and knowing that? The parking pad, or the garbage pad and fencing was one that was to be, and you said the LED, you felt the LED lighting? You're on, sir.
So I had the Tony Rose interior sign, I left the Peters recyclable containers, Tony Rose LED lighting, which I guess we could debate on. It sounds like there might be support for that. There's the exterior furniture, the concrete pad and fencing, and the chairs. So I guess if I was to summarize it, I would suggest that we leave page 132, which is the Tony Rose recyclable containers. We leave the LED lighting, which is on page 136, and then I would suggest that everything else comes off this list.
Okay, recap that for town staff, please, again. The
Yep,
ones that,
so page 121, Tony Rose interior sign 7K would come off.
yeah,
Tony Rose recyclable containers on page 132 would stay on. Page 136, Tony Rose LED lighting would stay on. Page 137, exterior furniture for 5K would come off. Page 140, concrete pad and fencing for 6K would come off. And page 210, which I think is a little bit outside of this, I apologize, but Tony Rose, 18K for Tony Rose chairs would come off.
councilors, do we have an agreement here on this? Yes? What are the chairs?
Page 210. It's a different section, but it's still Tony Rose. It is, thank you, Deputy Mayor. It's lifeguard chairs, yes. Well, we've got a pool, the question was, do I really want to cut them? We've got a pool that we need to make a decision on in 2022 that's going to cost $750,000. So, yeah, I don't think we should be spending any money on that pool until we make that decision.
Deputy Mayor McIntosh.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. I'm just worried about the safety. To Mr. Osmond, are those chairs safe the way they are for another year? Because we are still using the pool.
Mr. Osmond.
Your Worship, through Deputy Mayor, the chairs are safe. The existing chairs are safe. The new ones have been there. These have been there for a long, long time. And it's just a matter of, again, moving things along in all of our buildings. If they get used there, when we redesign the Alder facility, we'll just shift them over to the other site. Right now, we know we have 2 on each side. We could go 3. It depends on how you set up your operation with 8 lanes versus 6. You could delay it for a year and we could bring it back. It wouldn't create a huge issue with us.
Thank you.
Okay,
I'll support you then, Mr. Taylor.
Why don't we knock it off then? Okay, let's move, I'm sorry, Councilor Peters, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to go back to the other items. We're
All
good
right.
with the
Yep,
Tony
go
Rose
ahead.
stuff right now? Okay.
Go ahead. Are we still on 106 here?
I'm on 106,
All
yes. So 2 questions, I guess, first of all, through you to Mr. Osmond. Going back to the garbage receptacles, I know there's a tiny item, just from a practicality perspective. You said that, I guess, the budget was only for 2-stream. Would a 3-stream container cost more than what's allocated, or could you get a 3-stream container for the same price? So right now, garbage and recyclables are proposed. I would propose that in compost, but if that's going to have a budget impact, I just wanted to make it on the record, and then I'll stay on for my second question, if you don't mind.
Mr. Osmond.
Your Worship, through to Councilor Peters, the 3-stream would increase the cost of the units. Right now, we work on 2-stream in the buildings. We don't compost on the outside. We compost in the back end, but we don't compost in the front end with the public. If we go the next step, and we would have to increase the cost of the containers.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll throw that out there for discussion, and then I'll add a second curveball here. It came up last time as well, but I'd like to see us pursuing a metal roof on the OSPCA building, given that that building will be around for a while, and for longevity, durability, maintenance, and future replacement, I think it's a better investment. So I'd propose that. I don't know what that cost looks like compared to the 15 that's allocated, but I'd like to pursue it, assuming that we can get a competitive rate for that piece of work.
Mr. Osmond, do you have an idea of cost on that?
Your worship, without going through the process, our estimated cost for the roof is somewhere between $75,000 and $90,000 for a metal roof.
Versus 15? Wow. Okay. Yeah. Okay, well, I'm not in favor of changing that number myself, but if that's the delta on it. Okay, so can we move along here? We're going to pass on 106 and 107. We made some changes there. Next one is, let's get on here. I'm sorry? 174? Okay. All right. Once 173. Yes, okay. Folks, we're going to take a 5-minute health break, if that's okay with everybody. I guess Mr. Brennan is be back in a minute, but do we want to move along here to 173? This is, again, Facility and Parks Capital Budget Appendix. I have a question about Trail Development Plan. Mr. Osmond, so is this specifically for the development of the paved bicycle path from Veterans Way through to roughly Blind Line?
That is correct, Your Worship. That's if the, that's adjacent to the existing railway line at this point.
It'll be adjacent to or on top of?
Well, if certain decisions come through, then it could be, it would replace it, but right now, we're adjacent.
Ah, okay. And there is room on that easement for that trail? Okay,
That's correct.
very good. Councillor Sherwood?
Yes, Your Worship. So we're under Facilities and Parks, correct?
Yes.
Okay. One of the things I would like to bring up, that I had a confirmation email from Mr. Osmond stating that when I talked to item number 203, the Lions Outdoor Pool Building on Etowald, apparently there's going to be a little bit of funding shift there, that Lions have confirmed that they're going to contribute $36,000 towards the renovations. So I believe that should reduce that expense by $36,000, and that our portion will only be $14,000 now. So
Is that correct, Mr. Osmond?
That is correct, Your Worship.
So that should change from $50,000 to $14,000.
Right. Sorry, is that tax levy?
Tax levy will be reducing it by $31,000
Right.
and $5,000 out of reserves. Can I ask one more item while we're
Yes.
rolling here? I would also wonder, item number 202, the BMX pump track. I'm kind of not too much in favor of approving that rate at this time, only because I'm thinking we need to hold off until we hear back from the ICIP grant application. Perhaps Mr. Osmond want to speak to us on that.
Yep.
Your Worship,
ahead, Mr. Osmond.
that is correct, Your Worship. The thought process on the BMX park is one of two things. One is you could do it on an existing site if nothing happens to the Alder site. Number two is something happens to the Alder site, we could rejig it on the site and make some reconfiguration that can still accommodate it within the Alder parklands, and that would probably increase the cost. The Lions are interested in doing the asphalting of the existing BMX park to make it a pump track, if you would. And if they understand now, they know that if we were to go ahead with the Alder expansion, we would have to either rejig on the site or find ourselves a new site.
Last night I took a drive up to that Rebecca Hills Park. That's a big chunk of land up there. Surprised how large that park is. That might be a good spot to do something like that as well. I don't know, I'm just wondering, I don't think that existing location is the best spot. I think it needs to be a bigger and better pump track, much like they've done in Alton. So with again, the ICIP grant, I wonder if we should just delete this altogether, and then, once that is determined, find another better place for something like this and partner with the Lions. Ms. McKinney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just conferring with Treasury at the break. To your point on the deletion, if we could be very explicit whether we are deleting or deferring, so that when they're taking notes, they have an accurate reflection whether they're removing entirely or keeping in a go forward. Otherwise, we're going to have to go back and ask some questions again.
I'm suggesting it's deleted, but.
It's a general comment on all of the discussion.
Right. Anybody questioning that thought? Mr. Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I kind of consider this to be one of those Alder improvements that would roll over into the ICIP. So having it dedicated could contribute to that. If and when that project does or does not happen, it would be earmarked for perhaps a different site or the same site, right? So I think they're linked, and this is one of those ones that would build up that capacity for the matching funds.
Fair enough. Again, yeah, We've had this discussion 3 or 4 times now, haven't we, tonight, so. Okay. Is there anything else on this list, councillors, that you wish to question? Councillor Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I would just, I guess to Mr. Osmond, I'd like to ask the question about the Rotary Park dugout roofs. You know, I think we've all played baseball for a long period of time. It's such a short season here in Canada. I just don't, like, the picture that I see here and, you know, being in that facility, that's what I've always played in. It seems excessive to me to spend the $10,000, but again, I don't know. I don't know if there's a different rationale or if there's been safety issues or something else have been proven, but I just worry about it. It's on page 199. It's $8,500.
Councillor Taylor, I met with Jesse Edmonds, who's involved in the the Minor Baseball Association, and before the budget came out, he actually made comment that it'd be nice to have some covering there. I guess in the middle of the summer, it's brutal. The sun baking down on these kids and adults for that matter. So this is not an unusual thing in a new baseball diamond to have protection in the dugout. So, you know, the Baseball Association is requesting it. So, Deputy Mayor McIntosh.
Thank you, Worship. Maybe I missed it. What did we ever decide on the murals on the walking track? Was that taken out, or was that? Okay.
No. Okay, and I also wanted to make a quick comment on the Karen Court multi-purpose pad. So there is some sort of synergy going on there with the leadership team at ODSS, the folks at ACTS, and the Lions Club, I think, on 3 different projects. One is Lavender Lane Court, Karen Court, and also the pool house building. And meeting with Jesse Tipping of ACTS a few days ago, he also said that he was hoping and did confirm he would have some NBA players come up and to cut a ribbon and be part of a launch of those facilities when they get done. So that'd be a nice feather in our cap to have some real live NBA players up here. Okay, anything further on this? Sorry, Councillor Sherwood.
So just going back to the BM pump track. So I'm proposing that we actually remove it. It's
Right.
40,000, you know, is anybody else willing to support that, or?
I am. I would prefer to
So
just
can we
to
have
remove
a
it.
kind of a
and-
show of hands to see? So I think that's what we're asking, is to remove the BMX
Right. So,
track.
Madam Treasurer, we would like that deleted, please. Thank you. And again, I'm a Lions member, but I think the Lions want to do it right. They want to, you know, and for whatever reason, this piece of real estate really hasn't worked out that well. And I think if we put our thinking caps on again after we determine if the new addition to Alder is going to happen or not, we can find a different piece of real estate maybe and partner with them again. Okay. I'm sorry? Yes, Madam Treasurer.
Your Worship, can we get a clarification on the mural project? Is it a removal? Oh, okay.
But I believe, yes, I think we are going to ask for that to be removed, so. Mm-hmm. Okay, so again, on one, Mr. Brennan.
Your Worship, again, just for clarity, so that we're not backtracking a few times, for the outdoor Lions pool, the joint venture, we are going to reduce our ask from 50,000 down to
14.
14. So that's a reduction. We're not going to carry that 50,000 for ICIP. We're just going to reduce down to 14. Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so on pages 173 and 174, we've exhausted our discussion on this. Is that right? Okay. Next, 208, all right. Councillor Post.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I see councillors very eager to talk about deleting the walking track murals. I am absolutely not in favor of deleting that, and I'll tell you why. I think that there's some really interesting aspects of our community, and one is the investment that we give into public art. When you walk around our town, you get to see our wooden sculptures, you get to see our utility box program, and I did clarify with Mr. Osmond during the last budget meeting that this program will run very similar to how the utility box program does, in that it's going to be solicited to local artists, and it's going to be endorsing local artists' work. We're not hiring some company to paint the walls pretty. This is going to be promoting local artists, and I think that that's an absolutely critical thing that we can do moving forward in what we're looking to do with our community. So I absolutely do not support removing that $20,000.
How do you really feel? Okay. My thoughts were it's kind of advertising space. Would somebody consider sponsoring one of these murals? Councillor Post.
I'm sure that's something that we can look through. Having sat on the Arts and Culture Committee during the last term when they were starting off the utility box program, some of the utility boxes are actually partially sponsored by a company. So there's one that's partially sponsored by Meridian, which is the blues and jazz utility box. They paid a portion of it. Access Orangeville paid a portion of the one on Hanson. So on the tag that's on there, it does have their advertising on it as well, that they've been the sponsor to. We also have Humber College that's going to be sponsoring a portion of one of them once it's facilitated, that's going to be near where the college location is, or near the schools there. So yeah, that's definitely a possibility, and I'm sure Mr. Osmond can explain that further, but it has been definitely promoted through that sponsorship program in the past.
Yeah. Andy Warhol painted a Campbell soup tin. I don't know if you remember that, but maybe somebody could paint a wagon wheel box. I don't know. Just perhaps, yes. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship. I respect Councillor Post's passionate plea. However, I'm not in support of it. I kind of keep going on the need and the want, and to me, this isn't something we really, really need, and I think we really need to save the $20,000. So I would like to see it strike.
Deleted? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry,
Well,
Councillor Post.
Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would support keeping the murals. I think we want as many people in that facility as possible, and the tangential benefits of them going to the library or participating in programs or purchasing something from the concession that CLD runs. I think the benefits are there, even if not directly economic. I think in people's health and people's happiness and enjoying a facility to the degree that Councillor Taylor tends to strive for. So I'm with Councillor Post on this one.
Sounds like we're going to have a vote here, maybe. All right, so I guess the proposal by Councillor Post is to leave this in. Would you consider trying to find some sponsorship, Councillor Post? Go ahead.
I won't be out soliciting sponsors, but maybe Mr. Osmond would.
Okay. All right, so seconded by Mr. Peters. So I guess we need to call a vote on whether we keep murals or not. The vote is to keep them. So who would like to keep them? We've got three, we got four. It's a respect vote. Okay. All right, they survive. Very good. Okay, we're done with that page, I believe. The 218. Thank you. You want to get home to watch the National there, Madam Clerk? Is that? No, I see you're on it. Yeah, no, it's good. 218. All right. So this looks like things that we need here. We have an official plan review, being, any comments, councillors? We're good? Okay, 218 we're fine with. Sorry? 229 it is, okay. All right, so this is transportation and development. We have a number of elements here. Any councillors like to weigh in and ask questions on these items? I think they're pretty self-explanatory, and I think most of them are needed and replacements of existing equipment that are become dated. So, Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to go back to the discussion we started on the Boulevard brick rehabilitation. Again, I don't know what that number is, but I'd rather put some extra in here to get a more robust and lower maintenance solution so that over time, even if this went from 800 to 900 or 800 to $1 million, if we're saving tens of thousands in maintenance and repairs over the course of 10 or 15 years, I think we're only going to get one shot to do this in the next, decade or two. So I'd be curious what that number might look like and see if we can't get it to a level that'll save us in the long run. I don't. I would.
Mr. Jones, I think the question was asked, and I believe it was to replace it with the pavers as is. Has there been any thought about stamped concrete? Would this be a savings or more expensive?
Through you, Your Worship, my understanding is that stamped concrete would actually be somewhat more expensive until such time as we move through the decision-making process, look at various options. We won't nail down the exact price, and in fact, until such time as we go out to tender, we won't nail down the exact price. Certainly, when we are evaluating it, we're going to be looking at life cycle costs. As Councillor Peters has noted, the cheapest solution isn't always the cheapest solution in the long run, and sometimes you're better off spending a little bit more money up front. But that will all be part of the decision-making process, and if at the end of the day we have a tender that exceeds the allocated budget, we would be coming back to council asking for additional funds.
Right, but we really don't have any idea what that might be at this point.
Not at this time.
Okay. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm quite pleased with this. I like everything in the capital budget portion, including Mr. Jones's picture. I think it's well done, well thought out. Thank you, Mr. Jones. Well, my question to Mr. Jones would be twofold, and they're old and they're boring, and we've talked about them before, but I just want to make sure that I get it. So the first question to you, through you, Your Worship, my apologies, is can you speak again about the Hanson Bridge portion and why we can't move that up further? Because I just think the public will be interested in that. I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. And my other question is on Centennial, which, by the way, I'm so pleased to see that it's here. It is becoming a major issue as well. And I'm wondering if there's any way potential that we can move some of this up. I understand we've got the design and approval only for the 250 in 2020. It just feels to me, as someone who travels along that road on a regular basis, I think the term is crocodiling, where the pavement crackles. Have I got that right? And then the other one is the curve, where we all turn there in the wintertime. It is dangerous. So anyway, those are my two questions. The Hanson Street improvements to the bridge and then Centennial, is it possible to move that up?
Mr. Jones.
Through you, Your Worship, we do have funding to proceed with the design and approvals of the Hanson Boulevard Bridge through a previous capital budget approval. My understanding is that at this time, the developer who owns the property upon which the Hanson Boulevard extension will be built has now submitted an application for draft plan approval that has been circulated for review. This is a significant step in the right direction towards making this roadway connection. We have not proceeded with hiring a consultant to get the design and approvals done for the bridge yet. We have been waiting for this step, and now that this step has occurred, we will be moving forward to get that. Ultimately, we didn't want to have a design that was sitting, waiting to go to tender, and we certainly didn't want to build a bridge when we had no idea when the connecting road would be completed. Hopefully, those two things have taken a step forward in recent weeks, and we should be moving forward with some of that work. Ultimately, following draft plan approval of that subdivision, it would probably still be a year to 18 months before they had approved engineering drawings to move forward with that. But this is a good step forward. With respect to Centennial Road, it's a significant project. It's a significant cost. As Councillor Taylor has noted, there is deterioration of the road. The S-bend on Centennial Road, while it has been there for a very long time, and we've all grown accustomed to it, that is certainly something that we will be looking at when we are going in and considering different design options for that road. That is one of the reasons, and not the only reason, why the design for this road will perhaps take longer than other roads where we're replacing more like for like. We expected that the construction would be phased over 2 years. It would be a significant construction project, and trying to do it all in 1 year would be challenging both from a funding perspective as well as from a construction perspective. If it was Council's wish to move forward with a first phase in 2020, it is something that we could try to move forward. However, one of the things that we do try to do is try and move forward with some of our capital projects in terms of design early in the year. You'll see that we do carry an allowance for designing a construction project for the following year in each budget so that we can get a head start. When we go to tender on a project in the early part of the spring, we are going to get a much better construction price than we would if it goes later. My suggestion is that if we do indeed approve Centennial Road to move ahead, we may be hard-pressed to get a tender out for that first phase early enough to get a best price, and the difference between a best price and an okay price could be considerable. I also believe that it makes sense to consider tendering the whole project at once and phasing it over 2 years, and by doing that, again, we could perhaps achieve a much better price.
Thank you. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship, through you to Mr. Jones. I'm not, I wanted to speak to you about the noise fence. It doesn't indicate on the capital project definition where it's located, and by the photo, I can't figure out where it is. I'm not about to say I don't want to do it. I'm just curious where the noise fence is.
Mr. Jones.
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Sherwood, we have been moving forward replacing old noise fence the last several years. We have been focusing on the Rebecca Hills area. I believe that we would be I want to say completing that area next year, or at least getting quite close to it.
Thank you. And just one more comment, Your Worship, regarding the Broadway brick. As we've been making cuts here, we've been making cuts that are going to affect the tax levy, but we've also, by removing some of these, have been cutting some funds from reserves. And if I look at the Broadway Boulevard brick rehabilitation for the expense of the $109,000, they're only wanting to take $80,900 out of capital reserves. Is it any possibility that of these cuts, we can allocate what is being cut out of the reserves to this, to be topped up to this, to add to the 809?
Madam Treasurer.
Can I ask Councillor Sherwood to repeat that question?
So, for example, as we are removing items, so there's some items that we're removing that it would be a $40,000 expense, but $18,000 is from the tax levy, but then we're also cutting it from reserves. Are we able to take that money that we've now not going to be taking out of reserves and allocate it to another project? In other words, can we use that to help possibly top up the Broadway Boulevard? So instead of 809, if we're saving another 100,000 in reserve cuts here, can it be added to that? That's my question.
Thank you for repeating the question. So it really depends on the nature of the reserve. So for example, if some of these, and I'm speaking this in a very general term, so if some of the reserve allocation came from a general capital reserve, then definitely it can be reallocated to another project. But if the reserve in question is, let's say, a fire equipment reserve, you don't want to take money out of a fire equipment reserve and put it towards roads equipment. So it really depends on the nature of the project, the nature of the reserve.
So I guess what I was suggesting is that if there's any of these cuts, and there only have been a few, but would it be possible, since it's a general capital, if any of them have been cut, can we add it to this project? And how do my fellow councillors feel about that?
Madam Treasurer?
So as we go through some of the suggestions tonight and we go back to look at it and go over the numbers again. So one of the things we'll do is we'll go through the reserve allocation as it stands and try to incorporate some of the changes that we're hearing tonight. So when we come back, we should be able to walk you through what reserves were affected, how reserve allocations were done. But generally speaking, to answer your question, if some of these reserves that we're talking about are general in nature, then yes, reallocation is possible. But if they are more, I don't want to use the word discretionary, but if they're more earmarked in nature, so for example, if the reserve belongs to a particular division, then the reallocation between divisions is not possible.
Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Two things. So one, to go back to the Broadway piece. I did have correspondence from Mr. Lackey a couple of weeks ago talking about this. His estimation at the time was that it would be $950 to go to stamped concrete. Whether or not that's the number we want to look at least gives you a ballpark. Second, dovetailing on the Centennial Road discussion, through you to Mr. Jones, do you know offhand if the width of the current road would allow for bicycle lanes, or could you speculate on what changes might be required? Because that is a really great east-west corridor for a dedicated lane.
Agreed. Mr. Jones.
Through your worship to Councillor Peters, I do not believe that the current width of the road would allow for a bicycle lane. However, there is an asphalt sidewalk or trailway that runs adjacent to it. Certainly, again, that's one of the design considerations that we could look into with respect to that road, is whether a bicycle lane that's part of the road would make sense along there or not.
And you're going to take out the chicane, are you?
It's certainly going to be one of the considerations, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. All right, councillors, any further questions here? Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship, not a biggie, through you to Mr. Jones. Can you just explain to me how come the transit study is showing 5,000 every single year?
Mr. Jones.
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Sherwood, that's an allowance that we have left for advice from our consultant. As Council's aware, we completed a transit optimization study in 2016. That information has helped inform a lot of the decisions that Council has made since. We continue to go back to our consultant periodically, certainly during this task force exercise, to get advice from them with respect to different items as we hopefully move towards some clarity with respect to the future of Orangeville's transit system. We may be continuing to go to our consultant for other advice, including route structures and things of that sort, so that we can optimize the use of the system. We may not use that $5,000 allowance on a yearly basis. However, we keep it there because there are times that we need to go and ask them those sorts of questions.
So to the best of your knowledge, and perhaps you or the treasurer, you've never gone over the $5,000? Like 5,000 seems to be pretty adequate for the opinions?
To the best of my knowledge, we haven't. However, I would have to look into it further to give you a clear
No, that's
answer.
fine. I respect that. Thank you.
Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to close the Broadway discussion, I'll just throw out that we increase it to 900, and that this is obviously going to be going back to the Treasury Department to determine the balance of reserves or not versus levy. But I think that gives at least some wiggle room to explore options to go beyond the brick replacement piece.
I would support that. Well, hopefully. So, Councillor Peters suggesting increasing from 809 to 900 the project Broadway sidewalk rehabilitation. Are we agreed? Councillor Taylor? Yeah, okay. I think that's really important. It feeds into a lot of things: tourism, safety, accessibility. We talked about maybe trying to engineer the sidewalk so that some of the entries into storefronts were made more accessible as part of this engineering. So, yeah, I think that's a very good project for us. So was there, that's an addition. Were there any deletions here at all? I don't think so. Madam Treasurer? So this is pages 230, 231, and 232. Approval with the addition of $91,000 on the Broadway Rehabilitation Project. Okay. Thank you. 275 it is. Okay. Water Capital Budget Appendix. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have no questions regarding water. I'm prepared to pass that section as it's written. But I just, excuse me, I just wanted to make the point again, when we're all done this and the treasurer comes back to us next week with the varying amounts of the tax levy, reserves, and loan, I'm very concerned about the two things, which is the reserves and the loan, or sorry, the reserves and the levy. And I just like to kind of preface this with council that if there is a large gap in terms of what we're taking from the reserves, we should bring the levy up. Like we're in a very good situation. When you compare us to our friends in the north who are talking about a +8, I just want to make sure we're not going to put ourselves in a situation where our capital projects at some point dictate something really crazy that none of us as residents and secondary as politicians will want. We don't want to be in that spot. So I just want to preface that next week when we see what's happening here, I'm going to be suggesting that we make sure our reserves are up and we can land on wherever this is going to be, 1.4, 1.5, 1.6. I'm not partial. I'm worried about that as we do what we've done, and I don't have a sense for where we're at. But next week when we're together, that's what I'll be thinking about.
Thank you, sir. Councillor Peters.
Didn't realize it.
Oh, okay. I had a couple questions. So under water supply, 2021, Mr. Jones, you got 4.6 million. Just wondering what that is specifically, and also you've got under water meters 3.9 next year. So is that 3.9, does that cover replacing all the water meters in town?
Your Worship, yes, if you'll give me a moment. The 3.9 million is to replace all the water meters in town. The intent is to move forward in 2020 to select the technology that we would use, and then perhaps starting late in 2020 and moving through 2021, go through the exercise of replacing all of the water meters and billing system to what should take us forward for the next 20 years.
Great.
With respect to your question on the water supply and the costs for that in 2021, the 4.6 million that's been allocated, that is for the construction work associated with connecting the pull and well to the town's water supply system. We're currently moving through the class environmental assessment for that. Once we get class environmental assessment approval, the next steps will be to move to detailed design and getting a permit to take water for the well, and then there'd be the construction work associated with that.
The tests that you did, the volume and quality tests, that all went tickety-boo, as they say in engineering? Yeah.
Tickety-boo, Your Worship.
Okay, very good. Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It turns out I do have a question. It's surrounding the water meter and billing upgrades. This one's actually for the treasurer, through you to the treasurer. I noticed on 275 that the 2020 allocation is 465,000. When I look at the table on 278, it's showing 315, and I just want to make sure we're looking at the same amount when all things are put together.
Okay.
And maybe while people are looking at that, I have a question through you to Mr. Jones. Since this is all coming from the transfers from the dedicated water reserve, Does it make sense to slide any of the 2021 money forward to 2020 to accelerate the replacement of the meters? Since we're not talking about a levy impact, do you have enough in 2020 to get started if that process goes really smoothly for you to start replacement, or is there a rationale to defer to 2021 specifically?
Ultimately, when we go through the exercise of setting our water and wastewater rates, we're looking at collecting sufficient monies to fund both our operating and our capital costs for those programs. So in any given year, we necessarily collect more money in revenue than we spend in operating, and the excess goes into reserves. So there's always a reserve balance in for the water and for the wastewater reserves that we then draw on for our capital projects. We've allocated these monies in different years, but because they're really tapping into a reserve, it simply makes sense to incur these costs when we feel we will. That's what we've done in this budget. If indeed it turns out that we are accelerating our costs for this year, then perhaps it would be something that we would come back and ask council for additional monies. But at this point, these are the expenses that we expect to incur in 2020.
I just remembered one comment. As you know, Deputy Mayor McIntosh and I sit on the Orangeville Hydro Board, and it did come up in one of our meetings that the technology that the hydrometers use, I guess is it Census, is that the name of the company? And there's some synergy there if the town decides to select water meters using the same type of technology. There's, I guess, cell points throughout the town where this can be read from. Is that correct?
Your Worship, I'm not an expert in these things. We have had preliminary conversations with Orangeville Hydro about where there may be synergies with their network. I'm not sure whether the actual brand of meter has as big an impact as perhaps some other things. These are all part of what we're going to determine as we move through the exercise of technology selection to ensure that the technology that we're selecting is the best one for the town moving forward.
Very good. Thank you. Deputy Mayor McIntosh.
Thank you, Worship. Change of pace. This is to Mr. Osmond. I don't see anything in the capital in regards to Rebecca Hills Park. I know we talked about that last council meeting and you said there was a study. Is there any money put aside somewhere for that?
Your Worship, through to Deputy Mayor, no, there's no money put aside for it. It is in the question we're asking in the master plan. We've got feedback from the neighborhood. We do have things in the budget we can do in the actual site, but we have no plans this year for the area. We'd have to bring it forward in 2021 once we get a look at the master plan.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so I guess pages 275 and 276, everybody's okay with these expenditures? Okay. Oh, Madam Treasurer, did you clarify, was there a clerical error there, or no? Okay.
Through your worship to Councillor Peters, so the variance between those two pages of 150,000 is funded through carry forward reserve. Well, unfortunately, our individual project sheets don't have that line showing up, but like I said, the variance is funded through a carry forward reserve. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. 291. All right. Thank you. Okay, this is wastewater capital budget appendix. Those digesters are expensive, Mr. Jones. I don't know what it is, but I think it sounds gross, actually. So any comment from councillors? Are we good to go here on this grouping? Okay, that's good. And 305, thank you, Madam Clerk. Where are we? 305. Oh, we're, okay, that's an easy one. All right, is that the end? Okay, all right. Now, do we want to carry on, folks? Yeah? Okay. And then carry on? Do we want to ask if there's any questions from the audience and then carry on? All right. Well, we've got three gentlemen, Mr. Whitcomb, Mr. Spiteri, and Mr. Kidd. Any questions from anybody in the audience? Mr. Kidd.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council.
Can you come up and use the microphone? Because the folks at home won't be able to hear you. So.
Are you sure? Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council members. I have one question in regards to the walking trail that's proposed from Veterans Way to Center Street?
Blind Line.
Sorry, Blind Line.
In this year, right.
Now, I sent Mr. Osmond some pictures of about 5 or 6 pictures where the residents up where I live are going down to the little mall at on Broadway, where Green Apple and Shoppers Drug Mart.
Mm-hmm.
And Mr. Osmond replied back, which is right, that it's not part of the trails in Orangeville, but the residents over on the, where I live, they use that to go to that mall continuously. And I'm wondering if something could be done with that little section of trail, and Mr. Osmond may have looked at it and may have an answer, but I would like to see that upgraded.
You're talking at the end of Pheasant Court there and connecting into
yeah,
where
you know,
that
there's
new
like a
trail
little
would be.
to the mall, and you come out at the east side of the mall.
Right.
So it's, you know, it's hard for ladies and children and old people and everyone else to get through there. You're not going to stop it unless you put up a fence of some kind, and then you'll have everybody over in my area happy with you. So I'm just wondering if possibly we could have that upgraded somehow. I don't believe it has to be paved, but just to make it a little more safe.
Right. I think that's a reasonable request, Mr. Osmond. Hopefully you could take a look at that maybe and report back to us down the road, if that's possible.
Yes, Your Worship, we'll add that to our list, but the footpath that Mr. Kidd refers to is one that we've sent back to staff to take a closer look at, because the way it connects is not within the trail system network at this point.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So are we want to carry on here, folks, or all right? One more. We need the mic there.
Mr. Osmond's saying, looking at it, are we looking at it to do it this year, or are we looking at it to do it 5 years from now?
Don't know. But we did do a bike and trail master plan, and that is, according to Mr. Osmond just now, it's not on the radar right now, but now you've put it on the radar. So I think Mr. Osmond will have to report back to us with a cost estimate. I don't know if it can be.
I'm trying to find out if it's going to be the cost of estimate for this budget. That's what I'm trying to find out.
No, I don't think so.
Or are we going to leave it for another 2 years, or 1 year, or whatever?
Well, it won't be for this budget because it's too late, I think, for us to consider, but I know what you're talking about. I've been on that little trail, so it's probably something that the town should look at
Because
in the future.
someone's going to get hurt out there.
Is it? Yeah.
Yeah. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Where do you want to start? Mr. Peters? Okay. All right. I've got Mr. Andrews up first, sorry. Councillor Andrews.
Well, thank you very much, Your Worship. And this is, again, a piece that, having gone through each one of the lined items within this entire budget package, and this is a question that I had posed to a few staff, and this is regarding the public relations, promotions, and events. So as my fellow councillors, as you proceed through each one of those particular items, you will find that as a line in almost every single one of the presentations that are provided in our package. And as much as this is a high-level document, there seems to be, it's discretionary. We understand that, you know, each department has a reason why they've included it, But in a couple of examples, actually 3, I saw a 9% increase year over year, 29%, and I think it was about a 43% increase compared from 2019 to 2020. With the idea that each one of these departments that are asking this no doubt have a reason for it. And as much as this is high level for all of us, I don't want to start digging into the weeds, especially at this time of the night, but I'm wondering if you might be able to provide even just a brief amount of clarity for my fellow members of council, and if there was a way to look at reducing some of this, because the total allocation is about $368,000 when you add up everything from all the departments for this particular one item. So I'm wondering if there was further, first of all, explanation that you might be able to provide quickly. And then secondly, is it possible between now and next week that we could look at a way of maybe going back departmentally and get some clarity on why some of those items, that allocation is as high as it is in some of the departments? Thank you.
Madam Treasurer.
Through your worship to Councillor Andrews. So I think we can go back and bring some more clarity for that line item, because I think this line item is essentially one of those discretionary spending items for pretty much all divisional budget. So my position would be to bring back some clarity for our next budget meeting. In terms of, and I don't know whether you, because I know that question was posed in the email that you've sent me,
yeah,
whether this can be sort of consolidated under
kind of a centralized fashion.
Yeah. So that's more of a move forward, because from my vantage point, it's more a process change as opposed to a funding envelope change, and that can be definitely looked into from a move forward basis. However, for our next budget meeting, I can bring some clarity to your question.
And I'm not being critical, but I'm being more observant, because when we take a look at certain departments that have put forth this, I certainly respect, and I'm not going to isolate a specific department, but you know, there may be an event that is being held that that is rewarding staff. But we do also have in a couple of our committees under the council line, council has an allocation of about $34,000, and then we have our subcommittees that are also allocated certain amounts of money that, in fact, you know, may be warranted. But maybe as you proceed through this and provide a report back to council next week, we might be able to get a little more accuracy that would be helpful for all of us.
Okay. We'll do that.
Thank you.
Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to start with a win. I'm on page 18. We had this discussion at our Sustainable Orangeville meeting last month. So the proposal right now is to maintain the allocation from last year, which the committee very much appreciates. However, last year being sort of a truncated year, we didn't have an opportunity to look at such a variety of projects, that sort of thing. And so it was agreed, rather than the use it or lose it mentality, that we would propose starting the year again at that 30,000 number. That said, we have about 15 remaining, so I would propose that this number go down to 15 so that we reset at the correct amount, but we don't start accumulating funds in an unwarranted fashion.
Thank you, Councillor Peters. Madam Treasurer, we've got that recorded. That's on Sustainability Action Team or Sustainable Orangeville. Sustainable Orangeville. Okay, good. Councillor Post.
Thank you for starting that conversation, Councillor Peters, because I have a similar one with Access Orangeville. With Access Orangeville. We started with a budget of $25,000, and we haven't spent all of it either. There is one outstanding project that I'm waiting for a costing back on, but I would propose the same, that whatever we end up with, we would just carry over to still make up that $25,000 where we have a full year, but we'll be able to reduce our ask a little bit off of this levy.
Thank you. All right. Anything further, Councillor Sherwood? Do you want to? Yeah.
Oh, for Heritage.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I finally clued in here. Okay, yes. And if I could status quo with Heritage Orangeville as well.
Okay, very good. Yes.
Your Worship, just through you to Council, just a quick question on that particular page. So we already heard that sustainability action reducing from 30 to 15. So when you say that, are you just reducing it for 2020, or are you carrying that over to the next year?
Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, sorry, Ms. Landry. Anyway, again, because of how the projects were allocated this year, we thought rather than send some to reserve and ask for the same and do that sort of complicated financial exercise, if we reset at the 30 for this year, that would only be a 15 top-up. And so it would just be for the 2020 calendar or fiscal year. And then seeing where we end up at the end of 2020, obviously we could discuss where that went. But because the committees weren't really struck until about April, we didn't have an opportunity to get as many projects underway. I hope that answers it.
Just a further clarification.
Sure.
So if you're reducing the envelope, because right now if you look at that entire page, there is zero impact to tax levy because you're maintaining your budget envelope. So if you're reducing it in 2020, and for whatever reason you need to bring it up in 2021, that will come across as a increase or as a spike. So I'm just trying to be,
okay.
I'm just looking for some clarification. That is this reduction, or if you reduce it from 30 to 15, is that the envelope you're going to carry forward?
I wouldn't anticipate that that would be the number for the remaining years of the term, just because we had sort of a short year this year. We didn't want to dip the full 30 back in. We felt that was irresponsible. So however that math works out, whether it's this year or next year, by drawing less in the 2020 budget, we thought that would be a positive overall.
Mr. Brennan.
Your Worship, maybe if I recommend, maybe if we left the 30,000 as is, because then if the 15,000 is recognized as a surplus, then we can allocate that into a reserve at the end of the year. The town is not losing money. It will maintain that status quo, and you won't be seen as spiking up in next year's debate over these line items, if that makes sense to council. It'd be like a surplus anywhere else in the town, and we'll just recognize it at that time and allocate to next year, potentially.
Okay. Okay. Good try, but thank you, Councillor Peters. Go ahead, Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm assuming we've moved on to page 23 for corporate allocations operating budget.
Okay.
I'm on page 23. And this was, again, just a follow-up with Madam Treasurer to see if the updated amounts for CVC are reflected in your spreadsheets. Obviously, these printed copies are older, but I believe I sent what the approved levy was, so hopefully that will come into play. I believe it's a little less than what was currently split between corporate allocations and I forget if it's water, but the total number was around 289. So if that was 50-50, or about 144, and right now we're looking at 163, I think, on page 23. So I'm sure that'll be updated. I just wanted to point that out.
Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship. Also under corporate allocations 23, I wanted to address tax write-offs again. I know you have $500,000 there, and I really hope we're not writing off $500,000 in taxes, but I know there's nothing we can do if people appeal successfully. But I believe, Madam Treasurer, I did get confirmation from you last time that this included budgeted amounts for the vacancy rebate. Since that is definitely being eliminated by under the instructions of County of Dufferin, I'm asking that maybe you could consider reducing this by $100,000.
Madam Treasurer.
Through your worship to Councillor Sherwood, I have heard that the vacancy rebate program has been eliminated, but I haven't heard back from the county treasurer yet. In terms of taking out the vacancy rebate portion, I have to go back and check how much of $500,000 is allocated to the vacancy rebate. It may not be 100,000, it may be less than that. So I can definitely report back on December 16th.
I just did a quick math on last year's rebates, and I believe it was about 78,000, 74,000. So that's why I was thinking 100,000. But I'm even okay with it being 50,000. I just would like to see some type of reduction based on that program being eliminated. That was one of the things I worked really hard to try and go through, and I would like to see that be reflected in the budget.
Thank you. Councillor Post.
Thank you very much. The one that I want to talk about actually isn't going to save or add money, but it's about the facade improvement grant program. So I think that's a very important program that we've run in the town to improve the facade along Broadway especially. My suggestion would be that when it comes to that program, and it was suggested by our committee, that on alternating years, we use that facade grant rebate program specifically for businesses on Broadway who are looking to make their building accessible. So instead of it being towards the facade of the building, that it be towards the building an accessibility ramp, or that they a grant that they can apply for in that way. So that would just be a suggestion. I wanted to bring it up now while it's on the radar. So I know it doesn't have any impact on tax levy, but I think it's an important one to address.
Great, and I think as our sidewalk rehabilitation project develops, we'll be able to determine that in the near future. Yeah, good. Okay. Anybody else? Councillor Sherwood. Yes, ma'am.
So I guess, Your Worship, going back to the write-off again, we haven't really given the direction to the treasurer to do a reduction, but that is something I would like to do. So is this something that you want to provide further information?
She's going to report back on Monday, next Monday, and
Okay.
then with the exact number, and then we could
Okay.
make that.
Okay, thank you.
At that point. Okay. Okay. We want to talk about 32, which is Orangeville Police Operating Budget. They've reduced their budget this year. There's a levy impact of 2.36, but yeah, I guess the only concern I have is these under user fees, that would be the criminal record check revenue, and I'm a little concerned that that number is maybe high. Councillor Taylor, do you know where we're at right now, at the end of October? I forget. It was 250 maybe? I'm sorry.
Okay. So I actually did a little bit of research on this today because I'm worried about it as well. So moving forward, clearly businesses won't want to deal with us as a town as it relates to this record check revenue. So we are going to fall off. I don't know what that is, and Orangeville Police doesn't know what that is, obviously, and they're not acting in a nefarious way trying to make the revenue go off, but clearly it will. So this is a factor that we're going to have to put into play here, but I can't answer your question. I'm more worried about 2020 and the 6 or 8 months that we would have had the revenue that we're probably now not going to get it, right? So it's hard to plan for that. I don't know what to do with it, but it's a deficit for sure.
Okay. Well, I'm going to recommend we just let this ride for now, and it'll develop over the next several months, I guess. Councillor Taylor.
If I could, Your Worship. So I'm aligned with you. I don't think we have any other choice to let it ride. And I think what's going to happen is if we have any kind of deficit as we go forward, it's really just going to add on to whatever math we have to do with this lump sum amount. I'm calling it a lump sum amount, but our upfront charges for disbursements and all that sort of stuff. It'll just be, it'll be lugged on, and we're not going to know what that is until we get to the point, and I don't know what else we do with it. I don't have a suggestion. So.
Okay. So moving on, page 45 is corporate services operating budget. Anybody wish to weigh in on this? sorry. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship, I'm just going to make a general comment about the operating budget presentation. I'm not in no way being critical of how it's being presented, but I'm an actuals person, and I think you know that I like to see actuals. And when I see proposed budget against proposed budget, and the percentages going up and down, it doesn't sit well with me. And I know we don't have the 2019 actuals yet, because we haven't reached the end of the year and they haven't been audited. But it would have been nice to have seen 18 and perhaps 17's actuals so that we could see trends within the budget. Trends with, like, I look at an item and I know that under office and administration, there's probably 20 or 30 GLs that go under that, and I'm not wanting to nitpick by all of those lines by any means. But it would be nice to know that in the example, you budgeted 55,000 and you're asking for 64, and then that's a 8% increase or whatever. But if I had looked at the trends and saw that it was maybe 60 in 2018 or 40 in 2018, I'd have a good way of saying, yes, that really seems like a substantial ask. So again, I find it very hard to approve or not approve anything in this operating budget without seeing any actuals.
Okay. I think that's a good point, Councillor Sherwood. Thank you. So the only significant change here is in compensation. It's explained in the material drivers quite well, so I don't see any reason not to go forward and approve this page. 45, okay. We're now on to page 50, which is the Corporate Services Clerks Department. Anything, I'm sorry, Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I believe it would fall under this department. We spoke a couple of weeks ago about bylaw and accelerating some of the work on that. I would imagine that work's not captured, and this is probably the right time to talk about whether we want to add that item and what number that might represent.
I'm sorry. Say that again.
We talked about accelerating the bylaw review.
Oh, the bylaw.
Right, hiring someone part-time to accelerate, because we had a log jam of bylaws that we wanted to accelerate toward the earlier part of the term rather than the later part of the term.
Right.
So I think we're in the right department for that discussion.
Madam Clerk, have you looked into any or thought about a contract person to help us with something like this?
Yes, we've had some discussions with staff with respect to, the pet licensing bylaw and the animal control licensing bylaw. There was a request by council, if we were to move the review of those particular bylaws up to 2020, what resources would be needed in order to facilitate that? And in looking at it and looking at the other competing priorities within the division, we would be recommending that we would backfill the position to deal with having a records assistant assist with moving forward with the records program that we need to complete over the next number of years corporately. And then we would reallocate time from myself and within the deputy clerk to facilitate bringing those bylaws forward in 2020.
Okay.
Okay.
So does that mean you're resource-wise, you've got your resources you need to do that?
Oh, no, the resource that would be needed to do that would be approximately $60,000 to $70,000 to bring in a position for a one-year contract.
Okay. So, Councillor Peters, what are your thoughts there?
I mean, I think collectively we're all pushing for a number of those bylaws. If you look at the chart, there's some bylaws that aren't going to hit the table till 2027, 2028. If we're looking at really lengthy review times, as much as things are accelerating, I think for a short one-term cost to get ahead of that schedule is worth it in my mind.
Right, otherwise it'd be chicken before the egg. Kind of. Okay. Is there an appetite here for adding some resources on the bylaw front? I think so. So would we, Councillor Taylor, do you want to throw a number here, or you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that the work we've done already to add this in it feels like we'd be trading dollars, and I think it's a very prudent thing to do. And I do agree with the clerk that the 60 to 70,000 would get somebody in a contract position to come in. So I think that's the number, and you probably want to be on the high side.
Right. Okay, so we agreed we're going to add $70,000 into the operating budget of the clerk's department for a one-year contract. Okay. Any other changes or questions on this particular budget? No. I'm sorry, Councillor Post.
I have one question, and I'm not sure that this is the right spot to ask it, but I'm going to ask it anyways. As I reviewed through the budget, one thing that I couldn't find was an allocation number for community grants, and I just was wondering where that fell and what that dollar amount was that we're allocating for community grants going forward in 2020, because I know it's not something we've dealt with yet, but that it's going to be coming, so.
Madam Treasurer or Deputy Treasurer?
Through your worship to Councillor Post, I believe that line item is reflected under the corporate allocation operating. We're just checking this. Just give us a couple of minutes to locate that item.
You got it? So I'm on page 54 now, which is corporate services bylaw enforcement. Is this the place where the 70,000 should be going, or was it back in your clerk's department? Okay.
The clerk's department was the
Okay,
appropriate place.
fair enough. All right. Any comments or questions? So the big change is reallocation of crossing guards, compensation. And that's going to what department? Crossing guards? Going to community services? Okay, very good. All right, so we good to approve this page, folks? Everything okay? All right. 59, IT. All right. I'm sorry, there's a question. Mr. Whitcomb.
I don't see anything in this document about the Railway Corporation. How do we as taxpayers know anything about what's going on in that?
There is a line item here, I just can't, I have to, it's in corporate allocations, Mr. Whitcomb, and it's around $400,000. And that is to pay for property taxes in Brampton, Mississauga, and Caledon. It's also legal fees and some other miscellaneous expenses. $389,400 in 2020. $389,400. On page 23. Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you. But that's only part of the operation of that, of the whole business behind operating that railway.
Right.
And how do we as taxpayers have some sense of what's going on? What are the issues? What is the progress? What are the decisions that over the long term need to be made about that railway?
Well, there's a tri-party arrangement between something called OBRAG, the Orangeville Brampton Railway Access Group, which are the manufacturers, and the operator of the locomotives and the town. So really the operator of the locomotives and OBRAG have their own deal as far as the maintenance and operation of the rail line. We're only providing the real estate and paying the property taxes. That's the only input that the town of Orangeville has into that operation. We are looking at it, as you've probably seen in the newspaper, at maybe disposing of this asset and ending the rail line. That's a possibility.
And so how do we find out about that? How do we have input into that? How do we know about the ramifications of all of that?
I think there will be a public session at the appropriate time if there does come to be a decision or a potential decision of council, And I think we'd welcome your input now if you wish to weigh in at all. I mean, not this moment, but I mean, if you have some thoughts about it, all of us are interested in hearing about it. But
It's just about impossible to have thoughts on it when I don't know any of the data, when I don't know any of the information, when I don't know, nor do any of the rest of us as the taxpayers in town.
Yeah.
So how do we get access to the kind of thinking that you folks, because you're the directors of that or whatever, how do we get input into that kind of knowledge? And it isn't necessarily a budget decision right now, and so maybe this isn't the right time or place to bring it up. But it does have, if only that taxation line that you've mentioned. So I'm raising it as a longer-term issue.
okay. Councillor Sherwood, did you want to weigh in on this?
Yes, Your Worship. I just wanted to ask Mr. Brennan, are the ORDC board meetings open to the public?
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Sherwood. Actually, no. ORDC is a private corporation, and as such, we fall under the Private Corporations Act, and those are, as they say, private. And there isn't a requirement actually, and actually probably not a desirable to come out and brief the public on it. However, ORDC, the shareholder of ORDC is the town of Orangeville, and as you saw in previous discussions with the town council, there are some things that are open and brought forward to council. And as Mayor Brown said, if we were to dispose of that asset, we would probably discuss it in open council as well.
Okay, moving along. So we're on IT, page 59. Any comments, councillors, on this? Are we okay to move ahead and approve page 59? All right, thank you. 68, let's go on to 68. All right, this is Human Resources, operating budget, under Corporate Services. Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Ms. McKinney. I noticed a jump in professional development fees for this year only. They sort of reset after that. Is there one particular piece or professional development cost that's being captured here?
Ms. McKinney.
Is through the chair, the 50,000 allocated there is an additional 50,000 to increase training for things like continuous improvement, change management, project management, leadership skills, and things of that nature as we try to continue to build on the culture.
Very good. Okay, and go ahead again.
Thank you. Just sorry, this is a follow-up. It only falls in 2020. Like, is that the value moving forward, or are you sort of making a push to get everybody up to speed in a relatively short time?
We're making through the mayor, we're making a push certainly in this year, and we recognize that in some cases these types of requests are not ones that are easily moved ahead, so we wanted to demonstrate success before coming forward again.
So this is employee retention stuff, right? Yeah, okay, very good. All right, any other questions, councillors? We can approve this page, 68. 72. Trombones in the McBurry, 72. There we go. Okay. Sorry. Corporate Services, Communications. Again, that was the line item, Councillor Andrews, 73,000 in public relations, promotion, and events. Be nice if we could find out how that is made up. It'd be interesting to hear. Are we good to go here, councillors? Are we approving this? Okay. 77. Thank you. Orangeville Fire. Okay, councillors, any, okay, Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Just a very quick question. I guess this would be to Mr. Osmond. Regarding the safety equipment and clothing, what's the reason for the reduction in 2020? Because I know that there was an ask regarding some other equipment. The bunker gear. Thank you very much.
Your Worship, yeah, through to Councillor Andrews, we transferred the operational cost of bunker gear into capital.
Okay.
Carried over a period of years.
Great. Thank you very much for that clarification.
Okay, are we ready to approve this page, councillors? Very good. 88, thank you. Community Services Library Operating Budget. Any comments? Sorry, Councillor Peters?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This isn't to change a value per se, but in our discussions at the library board, we've noted that for at least a year or two, the utilities are coming in well below the budget, which says perhaps that it can be reset with further investigation. We're probably a little late in the process for it now, but for example, we've budgeted around $40,000, which I think is just sort of a trend, plus 2% every year kind of thing. But you know, year to date was more like half of that. And so even with a couple months left to report, say for November, December, I think we could probably tighten up those numbers in future years. And maybe that principle spreads across all our facilities. Maybe just sort of a task for the 2021 budget, maybe to look at the utilities a little more closely, because if we can get that number right the first time, we don't have to worry about the you know, surplus and levy. And obviously, we'll want to build in a little bit of a buffer because these things fluctuate quite a bit. But you know, to be twice the number, I think there's definitely some room to refine it in future years. So, just a thought.
Great, thank you. Councillor Sherwood.
And again, that's just kind of rubber stamps my comment. Had we seen actuals here of 2017 and 18, we would have seen that the trend was that they were coming in $20,000 or $30,000, and then we would have had an opportunity to question the $40,000. So again, that's just my comment.
Thank you. Okay, any other further comments on the library budget operating? Okay, we're approving that. 96, thank you. Okay, economic development and culture. All right. Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question through you to Mr. Osmond. The grants number, are these grants given out or grants coming in? You know, we've sort of flatlined at the 75,000 moving ahead. 2019 was 93. Maybe not off the top of your head. I understand it's sort of an individual line item there, but do you happen to recall why that number would fluctuate to that degree and why we might be flatlining? Was there a provincial program, for example, that fell through?
That would be correct, Your Worship, through the Councillor Grant. We did lose a entrepreneurial program this year it's going to go into 2020, and that would that decrease the expense side and also decrease the revenue side.
That was the starter company grants. Is that's what it is, yeah. Okay. All right, any further comments here, councillors? No? Okay, we're good to go on community services, economic and culture.
Yeah,
103, thank you. Councillor Andrews.
Through your worship, regarding our process of approving all of these operating budgets, again, it's precipitated on, if I can stress, the report that will be coming back from the treasurer next week regarding that line item that I was referring to earlier in each one of the budgets.
Yes.
Okay.
That will be revisited next Monday.
Great.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, any comments, councillors, on community services facilities operating budget? So, quite a jump in compensation. So reallocation, okay, can you explain that to us a little bit More, Mr. Osmond?
Your worship, this is a realignment in the way we budget in terms of what was happening was our facility guys are being charged off to the recreation side, and we reallocated from recreation events into facilities for some of the buildings. And that's where you're seeing the reallocation.
Okay.
So there's no impact on, zero impact.
Right. Okay. I'm sorry, Councillor Andrews?
And if I do recall, through you, Your Worship, to Mr. Osmond, this also includes, correct me if I'm wrong, the crossing guards. Is that also part of that? Because if I do recall, a couple of weeks ago, you had mentioned that in that particular reasoning for the increase of the compensation.
Mr. Osmond?
Yes, the crossing guards increase is also there, reallocated, and our crossing guards is shifted totally to that particular line item.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Councillor Sherwood?
Yes, Your Worship, through you to the Treasurer, could you perhaps explain to us the significant jump in the property taxes from 9,000 to 76,000?
Mm-hmm.
Through your worship to Councillor Sherwood, I would ask for a couple of minutes to research that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Peters?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Sherwood. What's the amount you're looking at? Because I'm looking at recreation and events, and their property taxes go down by 44,000. I don't know if that lines up with.
103.
You're on 103?
103.
I'm just wondering if it's a reallocation. What's the dollar value of the line item that you're? 9 to 76? 67, okay. 44 of that may be in recreation, but I don't want to make that presumption.
Okay. Shall we look at 105 while we're waiting for Treasurer to report back on that line item?
Your Worship, if I could, that line, we was a bunch of buildings that wasn't always under facilities. Now it's just getting itself cleaned up, and there was now reallocation of some of the buildings now into facilities that were on separate items before.
Okay. That's what happened? Okay. All right. There's a note there. Is that the note that says Humber parking lots? Was that part of it? That weren't there before? Just looking at material drivers on 104, that's all. Just,
Your Worship, we've picked up some parking lots in community services, and we look after the leases for those parking lots. I'm not sure if it's Humber, where that's referred to.
separate line? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Very good. Okay, so 105 we're on to now, which is Parks budget, operating budget. Any comments, councillors, or questions? We're good to go? All right. 106. No, 206, is that what you? 206, okay, sorry. Okay. This is recreation and events under community services operating budget. Again, there's a big chunk of reallocation of compensation there, right? Any comments, councillors? I'm sorry, Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Osmond, just could you elaborate on programs? They're going down somewhat. Is that more user fees coming in, or how does that affect the overall offering that we have in a given year? I'm looking at it's going from 53 down to 37.
Mr. Osmond.
And then holding steady around the mid-30s.
Your Worship, off the top of my head, I can't say exactly what that is, but I know there's a readjustment in what we were looking at budgeting for programming. Likewise, we're still trying to deal with the challenge of the aquatic side. This is not aquatics. But throughout our whole programming budget, we still got challenges with trying to get the staff, program staff and so on, different times of the year. And as we clean that up, you're seeing a readjustment in our budget. Hopefully it'll work itself back up again.
Also, you've got a significant decrease in user fees there of $250,000. Can you explain that, Mr. Oswald?
That's correct. That's one of the biggest issues there is the adjustment in aquatics. And aquatics, we're all challenged right now in this country and certainly in Orangeville to recruit instructors. And
Lifeguards, yeah.
we're losing significant dollars because the instructors, we're starting to see it come back now, but we're trying to aim low versus trying to aim too high.
So the majority of that's in your aquatics programs?
That would be correct.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. To piggyback everyone, Mr. Osmond, just if you would be so kind to explain the materials and supplies, why there is such a significant reduction from 96,000 to 350, or 96,350 down to 26,000. Again, I know that there's been some adjustments within the department, but always like seeing ways that we save money, but that's quite significant.
Mr. Osmond.
Your Worship, I'm going to have to come back on that one. It's it could be a transfer of reallocation of that one as well to facilities, so I want to make sure that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. Councillors, are we okay to move along here? 206 is okay? All right. Pardon me? 212. Thank you. Oh, for heaven's sake. Okay, Community Services Crossing Guards. Not much to talk about here. Maybe there is. Councillor Peters.
No, there isn't. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Your question reminded me, Councillor Andrews, and I think I had posed this earlier, so correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Osmond, but I asked about that line item earlier, and your response at the time was it reflects a concession supplies, which has been removed from the budget due to the turnover to CLD. Right. So, assuming that was correct at the time, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, good catch. Yeah, very good. Okay, so we okay on 212, folks? Moving along. 217 it is. All right. 217. Infrastructure Services Operating Budget for Planning Department. Any comments? We all right to move along then, folks? 217 is approved. 223. Infrastructure Services, Public Works Operating Budget. I'm sorry, Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I presume this would be directed to Mr. Jones. Could you just provide some clarification? And again, I apologize if somehow in this very long evening in previous discussions it may have come up, but the outside services, because it's quite a significant line item there.
Through your worship to Councillor Andrews, there's a decrease in the allocation for outside services in Public Works for 2020. That is related to the costs associated with snow removal. Removal being when we're bringing out the blowers and we're bringing in the dump trucks and hauling snow away because there's such a large accumulation. What we do is we run a 5-year average of our costs because that is a particular service that can fluctuate very significantly from one year to the next. And if we run a surplus in one year, it will go into a winter control reserve, and a deficit in another year will pull out of that reserve. Right now, our reserve is in good shape. Our 5-year average is somewhat lower. A bad year has fallen off the back end of that 5-year average, if you will, and because of that, we were able to allocate that much less money to it in 2020.
Very good. Okay, we okay to approve 223, folks? All right. 227. 227 is Infrastructure Services, Transportation and Development. Mr. Jones, outside services, that's first student, would it be?
Through you, Your Worship, yes, that's correct. That would be our operating contract with First Student to operate our transit system.
Right. Okay. Councilors, any questions on this? Okay. The one question I asked, Mr. Jones, did you send that fee schedule on advertising by any chance?
I did send you an email just before the council meeting began, Your Worship.
Okay. I know we talked about it because I think a year ago, some numbers came in front of us on advertising on buses that we thought were low. So I'd like, maybe I'll share this with you, whatever, Mr. Jones. Maybe we can have a comment about that next Monday, just to see if, what, can we adjust those as part of this budget meeting, those fees, or is there a bylaw or something we have to get involved with, Mr. Jones?
Your Worship, I'm not 100% sure if our advertising rates are in our rates and fees bylaw or not. That's something that I would have to check into. Last year, it was a suggestion made by council that we do review what we charge for advertising, and in fact, we are reviewing what we charge for advertising right now. We have moved along with our program, and in fact, I'm happy to announce that today was the first day that our new bus was on the road.
Oh, very good.
So we've now got our 4 buses. Certainly, as we move forward, we're going to want to review what we charge for advertising, particularly on the outside of the buses, which is the most successful part of the advertising program. There's other parts of it that we can't review. If you would like for next Monday, it's certainly something that staff can come back with a little bit more detail on exactly what it is, and perhaps even make some suggestions as to how we could adjust it. That said, the total advertising budget for transit, for exterior advertising, interior bus advertising, shelters, as well as benches, is a total of $22,000. So I would suggest that it's unrealistic to expect that any adjustments would make a significant impact to this year's budget.
Right. Without digging into your email, one of the questions I asked was, are we sharing revenue with the bench ad people and the bus shelter ad people?
Your Worship, that's correct. With the benches, we have a contract with a company called Bench Press. They used to have a different name. They've changed their corporate name. And in fact, they provide the benches and pay us $170 per bench, of which we have 34. We get $170 a year per bench, and they are their benches, but they collect any advertising revenue that they have. If they don't get advertising on the benches, we still get $170 per bench all year. When it comes to the shelters and the interior bus advertising, we do not have a contract with a company called Street Scene. However, they do approach us. They do a lot of advertising on transit systems throughout the province, and they'll bring more regional or provincial ad campaigns to us, and we'll get 75% of that revenue when there's shelters and inside advertising space available, which there typically are. So while we don't have a contract with them, there is some sharing of revenue with them.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, and thank you, Mr. Jones, for that point. And I think I may have brought this up at a previous council meeting regarding my view towards revenue generation. If there's an opportunity, especially with town assets that we have, and I've spoken to Mr. Osmond about this a few times, and I think, this is an opportune time, not at this time of the evening, but at some point, we can look at this as a more robust town report or staff report, There are opportunities here that we can work with third-party advertising companies, but more importantly, I know that we have also done so internally to try and maximize revenue generation at Alder, Tony Rose, and other subsequent locations. If there's some way that we can look at this as a consolidated approach where we can end up maximizing the assets and certainly generate some significant revenue at some point. And again, I'm always ambitious when it comes to revenue generation, so if there's something that we can look at some point, that would be certainly appreciated, especially from where I sit.
All right, very good. So we're good with 227, folks. Moving, 228 is cemetery operating. Mr. Brennan or Ms. McKinney? Yes, ma'am.
Sorry for the delays. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, and building on what Doug had said, Doug had, or Mr. Jones had said, transferred responsibility for that program to communications in the middle of last year, and Ray and I were talking previously about recreation advertising in particular being very successful from his perspective, but the additional components as it relates to the shelters themselves and other areas not being as successful as they could be, leveraging additional opportunities for town advertisements while looking for a potential contract with a third party to maximize the entire set of assets that we do own. So Sheila has actually done a fair amount of work on this to date.
Very good. Sorry, Councillor Andrews.
And my apologies for not including you in the conversation because I know it's important from the corporate services side, but I think it's an opportunity for us to have a healthy dialogue and to certainly provide council with some clarification on some of the plans that you've moved forward with. Thank you.
Okay, we're now on page, I'm sorry.
Through the mayor,
Yes,
if you'd like,
Ms.
I can
McKinney,
have
I'm
Sheila
sorry.
write up a summary of the work to date and can probably provide that fairly quickly.
Okay, 228 is the cemetery operating budget. Any comments? That's, no. All right, so we're approving 228. 271. Again, operating budget, infrastructure, services, water. Big ticket item here. Any comments, councillors? Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's not a 2020 budget item, but for anyone that stayed awake this long, I just wanted to recognize the foresight of Ms. McGinnity and Mr. Jones. They're looking at a full-time sustainability coordinator in 2021 to help enact all the things that we've been doing over the last term and last year for ourselves. So including looking at things like the SNAP and the climate adaptation and mitigation piece. So it's not an immediate impact, but something that I'm very much looking forward to discussing next year.
Right, and along that same line, I just wanted to let folks know that we had our Lieutenant Governor, Elizabeth Dowdeswell, visit us on Remembrance Day, and there was some conversations in the morning about climate action and about sustainability, and the following day, I received an invitation to Queen's Park to be part of a group discussion on the 17th of December. And we're just putting together, I guess, a little portfolio on the work that we've done over the past 10 plus years here in climate action and sustainability. So I want to thank Allison Miles and, of course, Ms. McKinney and Mr. Peters here for helping pull this together. But, for a town of our size, we've done a lot of remarkable things on climate action. So I'm quite proud of what this town has done in the past, and looking forward to shining, hopefully, on the 17th in front of some folks at Queen's Park. Okay, back to 271. Any further comments, councillors, on this item? Okay, so we're good with 271. 273. This is our wastewater operating budget. Any comments, councillors? Questions? Okay, approving 273 and 304. Operating budget, infrastructure services, building. Any comments or questions, councilors? Okay, approving page 304. That's it. Okay, well, it's 10:45, so thank you all for hanging in. I think we've got most of this completed. We'll have a recap next Monday. Thank you, Madam Treasurer and Deputy Treasurer. I think we just need to not right now. Let's save that for next. Let's save that for Monday. Any new business, councilors? Seeing none, we have a number of bylaws here. Bylaws listed below shall be read 3 times and finally passed. A bylaw to authorize a temporary borrowing of monies as specified in this bylaw to meet until the taxes are collected the current expenditures of the corporation of the town of Orangeville for the year 2020. A bylaw to provide for the levy and collection of rates or levies for the town of Orangeville for the interim levy for the year 2020, and a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the council, the budget meeting of the corporation of the town of Orangeville at its regular and closed council meeting held on December the 9th, 2019. May I have a motion? Councillor Sherwood, seconded by Councillor Andrews. All in favor? A motion to adjourn. Councillor or Deputy Mayor McIntosh, Councillor Post, all in favor? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.